Welcome back to another story on Super Harry. This time, we're bringing you, What If Sorting Hat screamed after reading Harry Mind and exposed Dumbledore 50-year master plan. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Hat screams. The Great Hall smelled like candles and old stone and something that might have been magic if magic had a smell, something electric, like the air before a thunderstorm. Every floating candle threw gold across the 4 long house tables, and 1,000 faces turned toward the doors as Professor McGonagall led the first years in a single nervous line. Harry Potter walked somewhere in the middle of that line and tried very hard not to look like he was about to be sick. He'd seen the ceiling already, vast and black and full of stars, and he'd heard Hermione Granger, 3 people ahead of him, murmuring about how it was enchanted to reflect the night sky outside, which Harry thought was exactly the sort of thing someone said when they were also trying not to look like they were about to be sick but wanted everyone to think they were perfectly fine. He felt a strange flash of warmth toward her for it. The stool sat at the front of the hall. The hat on it was old, patched, dirty, and deeply unimpressive. Harry stared at it while McGonagall unrolled her scroll and the hat's brim opened like a mouth. It sang. Harry listened to the song with approximately 40% of his attention. The rest was occupied with cataloguing the faces watching him from the 4 tables, the curious ones, the bored ones, the ones whispering to each other, the red-haired boy he'd met on the train already settled at the table with the lion crest. Ron Weasley caught his eye and gave an encouraging sort of grimace that was probably meant to be a smile. The song ended. The hall applauded. McGonagall began calling names. Abbott, Hannah. Hufflepuff. Bones, Susan. Hufflepuff. Boot, Terry. Ravenclaw. Harry's stomach tightened 1 notch with each name. He watched each student walk up, sit down, wait, and then erupt into the cheering of whichever house claimed them. It looked simple. It looked fine. He told himself it was fine. Granger, Hermione. She walked up with her chin out and her hands clasped in front of her like she was already prepared to take notes on the experience. The hat barely touched her hair before shouting Gryffindor, and she walked to the table with something that might have been relief flickering across her face before she composed it back into calm. More names. The line shortened. Harry's palms were damp. Longbottom, Neville, who'd already lost his toad twice on the train and looked like a person who had accepted that tonight would go badly, sat under the hat for almost a full minute before it called Gryffindor. He walked to the table with the slightly stunned expression of someone who'd expected worse. And then McGonagall looked at her scroll, and a ripple moved through the hall, not a sound exactly, more like a collective intake of breath, and she said, Potter, Harry. The whispers started immediately. He heard his own name bouncing back at him from every direction, felt the weight of every eye in the room. He kept his face neutral and walked to the stool. He sat down. McGonagall placed the hat on his head, and the brim dropped over his eyes, and the world went dark. Well, said a voice inside his skull, and it sounded like dry paper and old leather and something that had been thinking for 1,000 years. Well, well, well. Harry thought, go on then. Oh, said the hat. Oh, you're not what I expected. What did you expect? A frightened boy. They usually are, at 11. Even the brave ones. A pause, and Harry had the distinct impression of something very old and very attentive turning its full focus on him. You've been frightened before. Quite a lot. But right now you're not frightened at all. You're curious. I want to know where I belong. Yes, said the hat slowly. Yes, you do. Let me look. Harry didn't feel anything at first. Then he did, a sensation like someone rifling through papers, quick and professional, reading without judgment. He thought of the cupboard under the stairs and felt the hat pause. He thought of Hagrid arriving and saying you're a wizard and felt the hat move on. He thought of Diagon Alley, of Gringotts, of the vault that turned out to be almost empty, and felt the hat slow down. Someone's been managing your inheritance, the hat said, almost to itself. I know. Another pause, longer this time. Do you know who? I have a suspicion. Let me, oh. The hat stopped entirely. Oh. There's something else here. Something that isn't you. Harry felt it too, suddenly, like the hat had shone a light into a corner of his own mind he hadn't known existed, and something in that corner had flinched. Something dark and cold and deeply, horribly aware. What is that? I need to look at this more carefully. The hat's presence shifted, moving toward that dark corner, and Harry felt the temperature inside his own head drop. It's not a memory. It's not a talent. It's not, oh. Oh no. What is it? It's a piece of someone else's soul, the hat said, and its voice had changed completely. The dry academic tone was gone. What replaced it was something rawer, something genuinely shaken. There is a fragment of Voldemort's soul anchored in your scar, Harry Potter. It has been there since the night he killed your parents. Harry went very still inside. And, the hat continued, its voice dropping even further, someone else knows it's there. Has known for, let me see, the memories are there, encoded right alongside it. There's a man, old, he has blue eyes and, oh. Oh, I see now. I see all of it. Tell me. It's better if I show you. What happened next was not something Harry could have described to anyone later, not with any accuracy. It was like watching several films play simultaneously inside his own skull. He saw a man with silver hair and half-moon glasses standing in a room full of whirring instruments, speaking to a woman with red hair who was crying, "He'll be safe at the Dursleys, Lily, the blood protection," and the woman who was not yet dead was shaking her head and saying they hate magic, Albus, they'll hate him, and the man saying precisely, my dear, precisely, he must not grow up to think too highly of himself, he must be manageable. He saw calculations. Not written, but thought, a mind moving through decades of war with the cold efficiency of a chess grandmaster. He saw a prophecy spoken in a dirty pub, and he saw the same silver-haired man choose which child to invest in, which child to protect, which child to position at the center of a story that would only end one way. He saw the word Horcrux written in a private journal no one was meant to read, with a note beside it, the boy cannot know until the time is right. He must go to his death willingly. Love. It must feel like love. He saw 11 years of calculated neglect laid out like a blueprint. He saw himself clearly, perhaps for the first time, as what he had always been to Albus Dumbledore, not a child. Not a person. A mechanism. A key shaped like a boy, designed to turn one specific lock and then be used up in the turning. And the hat, which had been reading all of this with the focused attention of something that had sorted 10,000 students over 1,000 years and seen depths of the human mind that most humans never visited, the hat did something it had never done in 1,000 years of sorting ceremonies. It screamed. Not a human scream. Not even quite a sound. It was something between a scream and a broadcast, a tearing open of the boundary between one mind and a shared space, and every single person in the great hall felt it hit them simultaneously, a wave of raw image and emotion and knowing, unfiltered and total. The candles guttered. 2 students at the Ravenclaw table fainted outright. A portrait on the wall began shouting incoherently. The ghost of a fat monk floated straight through a wall. Professor McGonagall knocked over her scroll and caught the edge of the staff table with both hands, white-faced. Professor Quirrell made a sound like a small animal and pressed both hands to his turban. At the end of the staff table, Albus Dumbledore went very, very still, and the twinkle that was usually in his eyes went out like a snuffed flame. In the great hall, for the span of 3 full seconds, there was absolute silence. Then everyone started screaming at once. Harry pulled the hat off his head. The noise crashed into him, hundreds of voices all breaking open simultaneously, chairs scraping, someone crying, someone else shouting that's not possible, several people calling for Dumbledore, Dumbledore's name bouncing off the stone walls and high ceiling like a rubber ball in a small room. Harry sat on the stool and looked out at all of it. He was not crying. He was not shaking. He was not doing any of the things that a person who had just had 11 years of deliberate manipulation revealed to them in a single 2-minute brain scan should theoretically be doing. He was sitting very straight on a small wooden stool in the middle of the most famous school in Britain, and he was furious, and the fury was so clean and so complete that it felt almost like calm. He understood, in that moment, why the hat had screamed. It had been in his mind. It had felt the weight of what had been done to him. And whatever enchantment the Sorting Hat carried, whatever ancient magic bound it to honesty in a way that no human advisor ever was, had simply overridden everything else. The hat couldn't hold that kind of truth inside. Nothing could. He looked down the staff table. Dumbledore was already watching him. The old man's face was composed, eyes calculating, and Harry recognized that look now in a way he couldn't have 20 minutes ago. It was the look of a man revising a plan. Not panicking. Revising. The kind of revision that happened when a chess piece moved unexpectedly but the player believed they could still control the board. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood up, on the stool, so that he was taller than anyone in the room, and he waited. The noise took almost a full minute to quiet. It dropped in stages, first the shouting, then the crying, then the frantic whispered conversations, until the hall had descended into a charged and trembling silence. 400 students, a dozen teachers, 100 ghosts and portraits all looking at a small, messy-haired boy standing on a stool in the middle of the room. Harry's voice, when he spoke, was not loud. He didn't need it to be loud. The hall was quiet enough that a whisper would have carried. "My name is Harry Potter," he said. "Most of you already knew that. Some of you just learned some other things about me, and I'm guessing you have questions. So do I." He looked at Dumbledore again, held the gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then looked back at the students. "But first I'm going to finish my sorting, because I'm not going to stand here all night." He picked up the hat. There was an audible collective intake of breath as he held it. Then he said, clearly and to the whole room, "I'm choosing Gryffindor." He put the hat on for exactly 1 second, during which the hat said, and somehow its voice was audible to the whole hall now, the broadcast mechanism still running, "Gryffindor." Not a shout. A confirmation. Harry stepped down from the stool. He walked to the Gryffindor table, sat down next to a rigid, wide-eyed Hermione Granger, and reached across her for a bread roll. The hall erupted again. McGonagall eventually got the sorting finished through what appeared to be sheer force of will. She called the remaining names in a voice that brooked no interruption and glared at anyone who tried to speak until they subsided. The food appeared, as it always did, but hardly anyone ate. The 4 tables had broken into separate whispering countries, each processing the same information from different angles. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy sat with both hands flat on the table and a look on his face that Harry, from across the hall, couldn't quite read. Not contempt, for once. Something more complicated. At the staff table, Dumbledore had not moved. He sat in his high-backed chair with his hands folded in front of him and watched the hall the way a very experienced sailor watches a sudden storm, not afraid, but entirely focused, reading every variable. Snape was staring at Harry with an expression that might have been carved from stone except for something happening around his eyes, a kind of rapid, internal reassessment so complete it was almost visible. Whatever conclusions he'd already drawn about Harry Potter, he was drawing again from scratch. Quirrell appeared to be having a very quiet breakdown at his end of the table and was being studiously ignored by everyone near him. Hermione, beside Harry, had not touched her food either. She had her hands in her lap and she was looking at the table, and Harry could see her thinking, the slight movement of her lips, the way her eyes tracked side to side even though she was looking at nothing. Working through it. Cataloging it. "You're not eating," Harry said. She looked up. Her eyes were bright, not wet, just sharp, the way eyes got when a brain was running hard. "I'm thinking." "I know. Eat while you think." She picked up her fork automatically, then set it down again. "The Horcrux," she started. "I know." Harry, if there's a piece of his soul in your, I know, Hermione. But do you understand what that, yes? He looked at her steadily. I understand what it means. I understand what it means that Dumbledore knew and didn't tell me. I understand all of it. And I need you to help me figure out what to do about it, but not tonight, because tonight I need to eat something and sleep somewhere and not have a complete breakdown in front of 400 people. A beat. So eat. She picked up her fork again. This time she kept it. Right, she said, quietly. Right. Yes. And then, after a pause, you were very calm. Up there. I wasn't calm. He bit into the bread roll. I was angry. Calm and angry feel the same from the outside if you're doing it right. She looked at him with an expression he'd never seen on anyone's face before, something between respect and wariness and a kind of dawning realization. Who taught you that? Nobody, he said. I figured it out in the cupboard. She didn't ask about the cupboard. She seemed to understand, instinctively, that questions about the cupboard were not for tonight. Instead she said, the Dursleys. He chose them deliberately. Yes. The memory was, I felt it. The whole hall felt it. The hat broadcast his memory of the conversation with your mother and, she stopped. Her jaw tightened. He told her it was for your protection. The blood magic, the sacrifice, and the part where he needed me not to think too highly of myself. Harry's voice was even. Did you feel that part? Yes, Hermione said, and her voice was not even at all. She was angrier than he was, he realized. She just hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Yes, I felt that part. Ron leaned across from her other side, food in hand, eyes wide. He'd eaten, apparently. Some people processed shock through their stomach. So, Ron said. That was. That was something. Ron, said Harry. Yeah. Are you all right? Ron seemed genuinely surprised to be asked. He chewed, swallowed, thought about it. I don't know, he said honestly. Percy always said Dumbledore was the greatest wizard alive and our family sort of, we think that. Thought that. He frowned. Mum thinks that. What do you think? Harry asked. Ron was quiet for a long moment. Around them the hall churned and buzzed. From the staff table, McGonagall had leaned over to speak quietly to Dumbledore, whose response was a slight shake of the head and a gesture toward the door, not yet, not here. I think, Ron said slowly, that what the hat showed us was real. The hat doesn't lie. It can't. Everyone knows it can't. It's the oldest enchantment in the school. He looked at Harry. And I think if it's real, then that's bad. Yes, said Harry simply. It is. From further down the table, Neville Longbottom had turned so that he was sideways on the bench, not eating, not talking to anyone. He was looking at the staff table. Not at Dumbledore, specifically, his gaze was slightly unfocused, turned inward. Harry watched him for a moment and remembered something from the hat's broadcast, something that had been in the deeper layers of what it had found, the prophecy itself, the actual words of it, and the note in Dumbledore's private mind that the prophecy could have meant either child, that he had chosen Harry, that the choice had been partly tactical. Neville's parents were in St. Mungo's. Had been for 10 years. Harry would need to talk to Neville. But not tonight. Dumbledore asked to see Harry at 9 o'clock. The message came through McGonagall, who appeared at the Gryffindor table during dessert with the controlled expression of a woman holding a great many things together by willpower alone. She told Harry quietly that the headmaster would like to speak with him after the feast, that it was entirely at Harry's discretion whether he wished to attend, and that here she paused and something moved behind her eyes, she would be present herself, if Harry preferred not to go alone. Thank you, Professor, Harry said. I'll go. She nodded once, sharply. Then she said, very quietly, so only he could hear, "For what it's worth, Mr. Potter, what the hat revealed tonight was, there are things that will need to be answered for." Her jaw tightened. Properly answered for. He looked up at her. She was looking at the middle distance, not at him, her expression professionally neutral except for the single tight line of her mouth. He understood, then, that Minerva McGonagall had also received everything the hat broadcast, and that she was also furious, and that she was handling it by using very careful language in a very controlled voice and would apparently continue to do so until the precise moment that she chose not to. He thought he might like her quite a lot. "I'll be there," he said. The feast ended. The prefects led the Gryffindors out through the hall, Percy Weasley at the front with his badge gleaming, his face carrying the expression of someone whose entire worldview had been rocked but who had decided that the correct response was to hold the badge straighter. He gave Harry a look that was somewhere between suspicious and fascinated as they filed out. Harry let the crowd carry him up the first staircase and then peeled off, heading back toward the corridor McGonagall had indicated. Hermione appeared at his elbow. "I'm coming. You don't have to. I'm aware." He didn't argue. He thought about it for a moment and then didn't argue. She fell into step beside him, and they walked through the moving staircases, Harry barely noticing how strange they were, too occupied to be startled, until they found the corridor with the stone gargoyle, which leapt aside before Harry had to say anything, which he found telling. The gargoyle wasn't waiting for a password. It had been told to expect him. The stairs spiraled upward and delivered them to a heavy wooden door, and Harry knocked once and pushed it open without waiting for an answer. Dumbledore's office was full of magical instruments, silver things spinning and clicking and measuring God knew what, and the portraits of past headmasters lined every wall, several of them awake and watching with undisguised attention. Fawkes the Phoenix sat on his perch and regarded Harry with one orange eye and then made a sound, not a song, exactly, but something soft and complicated, almost like an apology. Dumbledore was behind his desk. He had arranged himself with great care, robes straight, hands folded, half-moon spectacles precisely positioned, the lamp at an angle that caught the silver in his beard and made him look serene and ancient and kind. Everything about the composition of him said, "I am the wisest man you will ever meet and everything I have done has been for your benefit." Harry sat in a chair across the desk without being invited. Hermione stood slightly behind and to his left, which put her in Dumbledore's peripheral vision, a position, Harry suspected, that was entirely deliberate on her part. "Harry," Dumbledore said. His voice was warm. Gentle. "Thank you for coming." "You're welcome," Harry said. A brief pause. Dumbledore had expected something different from that, some flash of anger, maybe, or some childish demand. Harry could see the small recalibration happening. "I imagine tonight has been rather overwhelming." "It's been informative," Harry said. Another pause. "Yes." Dumbledore folded his hands more carefully. "I suspect you have questions." "One," Harry said. Dumbledore looked slightly surprised. "Only one?" "To start." Harry looked at him steadily. "Why?" The old man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, gently, "That is quite a broad question, Harry." "Then give me a broad answer." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. The instrument spun behind his head. Fawkes made another sound, low and uneasy. The portraits watched. And Dumbledore, who had, in Harry's estimation, not said a genuinely unmanaged, unstrategic word to another person in approximately 50 years, took a slow breath, and said, "Because Voldemort cannot be destroyed by conventional means. Because the night he attacked your family, when the killing curse rebounded, a piece of his soul was damaged and fractured, and that fragment lodged in you. Because the only way to destroy that piece, and thus make him fully mortal, is to destroy its container." He paused. "And because I have spent 50 years trying to ensure that when the time came, the right person would be in place to make that sacrifice willingly." The office was completely silent. "Right," Harry said. "And I'm the container." "You are." And you've known since when? Since shortly after the night it happened. The instruments, he gestured at the spinning things on the shelves. They told me what had occurred within the first few days. So for 11 years, Harry said, you've known that I have a piece of Voldemort's soul in my head. And rather than telling me, or trying to find another way, or treating me like a person who deserved to know the facts of his own situation, he stopped, not because he'd run out of words but because he was choosing them carefully. You sent me to live in a cupboard. Deliberately. The blood protection, don't. Harry's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Something in it changed, something harder underneath the calm. Don't tell me about the blood protection. The blood protection required that I lived there. It did not require that the Dursleys knew nothing about magic and hated it. It did not require that they treated me like I was worth less than their furniture. Those things were extra. You added those. Because you needed me manageable. Dumbledore was very quiet. Did you tell my mother? Harry said. Before she died. Did she know about the Horcrux? No. But she knew you wanted me at the Dursleys. Yes. And she argued with you. Yes. And you sent me there anyway. Dumbledore stopped. Lily was not, the decision was mine to make. She was my mother, Harry said. And she disagreed with you. And you did it anyway. Because it was your decision to make. He let that sit in the air of the office for a moment. That's what I wanted to know. He stood up. Harry, Dumbledore started. I'm not angry with you, Harry said, which wasn't quite true and they both knew it. I'm clear about you. That's different. He looked at Dumbledore, really looked at him, the way he hadn't been able to before, when the old man had been a figure too large to see clearly. He was just a person. A brilliant, complicated, terrifyingly capable person who had looked at an infant and decided what that infant's death would be worth. I'll need the file on my inheritance. I know you have one. I'll need it on my desk by Wednesday. Dumbledore blinked. I'm not certain, Gringotts will have a copy, Harry said. I can get it from there if you'd prefer I involve the goblins. A pause. They tend to be thorough. Dumbledore looked at him, really looked, the way he hadn't done since Harry walked in. What he was seeing was clearly not what he'd prepared for. He'd prepared for tears, or anger, or a frightened child needing to be soothed back into compliance. He was seeing, instead, something he hadn't accounted for, a boy who had understood everything, processed it at speed, and come to this meeting not to ask for comfort but to take inventory. Very well, Dumbledore said, after a long pause. I'll have it sent to you. Thank you. Harry turned to go. At the door, he stopped. One more thing. There are other Horcruxes. Dumbledore's expression flickered. More than one, Harry continued. The fragment in my scar isn't the only piece of his soul he scattered. You know this. I felt it in the broadcast, you know this and you've been researching it. He turned back, and met the old man's eyes without flinching. I want your research notes too. Silence. Harry, Dumbledore said quietly, and for the first time tonight something genuinely human moved through his voice, something that might, in another context, have been worry. You are 11 years old. And I have a piece of a dark wizard's soul living in my skull, Harry said pleasantly. So I'm highly motivated. He opened the door. Good night, Professor. He walked out. Hermione was right behind him, and she didn't say anything until they were 2 staircases away, and then she said, very quietly, how long had you been planning that? About 40 minutes, Harry said. She absorbed this. What's a Horcrux? An object that contains a piece of someone's soul. He made more than one. To survive, to keep himself from truly dying even if his body's destroyed. Harry glanced at her. There are several. Scattered. Hidden. How do you know there are several? The hat only showed, it showed Dumbledore's research notes. Just the corner of them. But I saw the word Horcruxes, plural. Harry navigated a moving staircase without looking at it, purely by feel. Someone split their soul multiple times. That's, from what the hat gave me, it's the darkest magic there is. It requires murder. Every time. Hermione made a sound that was not quite words. I know, Harry said. They reached the portrait of the fat lady, who was staring at Harry with the expression of a woman who had heard everything through the castle's network of portraits and had a great many opinions about it that she was restraining with difficulty. Password, she said, very carefully. Caput Draconis, Harry said, which he'd heard Percy announce to the other Gryffindors on the way up. The portrait swung open. The Gryffindor common room was loud in the way that rooms become loud when everyone in them is having a different version of the same conversation. It went quiet when Harry walked in, not the hostile quiet of before, but something more complex. Curious. Uncertain. Several people started talking at once, and Harry held up a hand, and the talking stopped. I know, he said. Tomorrow. Please. And he was surprised by how much it worked. The room settled, not because he'd commanded it but because something in the way he'd said please had sounded genuinely human. Tired, even. He was tired. Neville Longbottom was in the corner. He caught Harry's eye and something passed between them, an acknowledgement, a question held for later, and Harry nodded, and Neville gave a small, tight nod back. Harry went up to his dormitory. His trunk was at the foot of the bed nearest the window. He sat on the edge of the mattress, looked at his hands in the dark, and thought about his mother's voice, the voice from the hat's broadcast, not from a memory he actually owned, saying they'll hate him, Albus. Like she'd known exactly what she was arguing against and had argued anyway. She'd seen clearly. She'd been right. And she'd lost the argument, and then she'd lost everything else. He pressed his fingertips against the scar on his forehead, feeling the familiar thin ridge of it. Something in there that wasn't him. Something cold and patient and other. He could almost feel it now that he knew what to feel for, a slight weight, a faint pressure, like a passenger in the back of a car who was being very quiet and hoped you'd forgotten they were there. I haven't forgotten, he told it quietly, in the dark. The scar gave a single, faint throb. Whether that was acknowledgement or warning or just his imagination, he genuinely couldn't say. He lay back on the bed and stared at the curtains of the four-poster and thought about chess, about what it meant to be a piece, and what it meant to pick yourself up off the board and decide you were a player instead. He thought about it for a long time. Then he slept. Dreamlessly, which seemed, under the circumstances, like a victory. Down in the great hall, long after the students had gone to bed, the Sorting Hat sat on its stool in the empty room. The candles had been extinguished. The enchanted ceiling showed clouds crossing the stars. And the hat was still, genuinely still, in a way it hadn't been since it was made, sitting with what it had done, and what it had seen, and the way a small, furious, clear-eyed boy had picked it up off his own head and said I'm choosing Gryffindor with the steady certainty of someone who had just decided that for the rest of his life, every choice would be his. The hat had spent 1,000 years making those choices for children. It found that it rather admired him. Down a different corridor, behind a different door, in an office full of spinning instruments, Albus Dumbledore sat alone in the dark and thought about a chess game 50 years in the making, and a single move he had never accounted for, and what it meant that the piece had looked at the board and smiled. In the dungeons, Severus Snape sat at his desk with a glass of wine he hadn't touched, staring at nothing, revising every assumption he had made in the last decade. And on a turban somewhere in the castle, something ancient and malevolent had been very quiet all evening, listening. Waiting to see what the boy would do next. Chapter 2, The morning after the earthquake the owls arrived at breakfast. Not unusual, owls always arrived at breakfast, swooping down through the enchanted ceiling in messy organized chaos, dropping letters and packages into laps and porridge bowls with equal indifference. But this morning there were more of them. Many more. They came in waves, some landing on the Gryffindor table, several on the staff table, three at once fighting over a spot near McGonagall's elbow. One very large eagle owl circled the hall twice before dropping a thick envelope directly in front of Dumbledore and leaving without waiting for a reply, which was, in owl terms, something close to a formal declaration. Harry watched all of it from his seat at the Gryffindor table, eating toast. He'd slept 8 hours and woken up feeling, against all reasonable expectation, entirely clear-headed. The clarity had surprised him at first. He'd expected to find the events of last night looking larger and more terrifying in the morning light, the way bad things often did when the adrenaline wore off. Instead they looked the same. Same size, same shape, same temperature. He understood them. He'd understood them the moment the hat had screamed, and sleep hadn't changed that. He was spreading marmalade when Hermione sat down across from him, dropped 3 books on the table, and said, "I've been up since 5. "I know," Harry said. "How do you know?" "Your eyes." He glanced up at her. She had the specific bright-edged look of someone who had been awake and reading for hours and was running on discovery rather than sleep. "What did you find?" She opened the largest of the 3 books, an ancient, spine-cracked thing that looked like it had been argued with by several previous readers, given the number of annotations crowding its margins. "This is Advanced Theoretical Dark Arts, Restricted Section. I asked the library." "You asked the library at 5 in the morning?" "I left a note." The point is, she smoothed the page with the flat of her hand, found the section she wanted, and turned it toward him. Horcruxes. The theoretical section, not the practical. The practical part has been torn out of every copy in the library, which is itself quite informative, but the theory is still intact. And Harry. She put her finger on a paragraph and waited for him to read it. He read it. Then he read it again. The paragraph explained, in the dry and clinical language of old academic dark arts scholarship, that a Horcrux was technically reversible under 3 conditions: if the container was willing, if the fragment was sufficiently isolated, and if a specific counter-enchantment, a form of very old and very specific love magic, the same family of sacrifice magic that had protected Harry in the first place, was applied. It had never been done. There were no recorded cases. The author considered it theoretically possible in the same way that theoretically possible covered a number of things that had never actually happened. But it was there. In print. In a book that had been sitting in the Hogwarts library for 400 years. Harry set down his toast. "You found this in 5 hours. 2 hours. The other 3 were spent on the other Horcruxes, or rather, trying to find anything about what they might be. There's very little. The magic required to make one is so specific and so dark that most serious scholars refuse to commit the methodology to paper, which is responsible but deeply inconvenient." She pulled book 2 forward, smaller, red-covered, with the Hogwarts crest embossed on the front. "This is a restricted history of Voldemort's first rise to power. His real name was Tom Riddle. He was a Hogwarts student, here, in the 1940s. He was head boy." She paused meaningfully. Harry looked up. "Dumbledore was teaching here in the 1940s. He was the Transfiguration professor." And there's a short passage, she found the page, about how Riddle, as a student, asked a teacher about Horcruxes. The teacher isn't named. It just says, a senior member of staff. She looked at him steadily. If Dumbledore knew, as a teacher, that Tom Riddle was asking about soul-splitting dark magic, then he's known about the possibility of Horcruxes since before Voldemort made any of them, Harry finished. He was very quiet for a moment. Then, "Did you sleep at all?" "I'll sleep later. This is more important." "It's not more important than your health." She stared at him. "You have a piece of dark wizard inside your head and you're worried about whether I slept. The 2 things can both be true." He looked at her steadily. "Eat something." She grabbed a piece of toast with the controlled irritation of someone who had been in the middle of making an important point. "The 3rd book," she said, around a bite, "is about magical inheritance law. Specifically, the clauses governing orphaned magical children, vault access, and the role of ministry-appointed guardians versus family-appointed ones. She chewed, swallowed, tapped the cover significantly. Your parents had a will. Harry went still. The Potters had a will, Hermione said. Executed before they went into hiding. A magical will, which in Britain is legally binding and magically sealed and cannot be altered or suppressed without specific ministry authorization. She met his eyes. You were not placed with the Dursleys in accordance with your parents' will. There's a section here, page 241, about what happens when a designated guardian is overlooked in favor of a ministry or headmaster recommendation. A pause. It's quite serious. Legally. The toast Harry had been holding had gone cold. He set it down. Around them, the hall was filling up, the breakfast noise climbing toward its usual pitch, students navigating the morning after a catastrophic evening in a dozen different ways, some determinedly pretending nothing had happened, some unable to talk about anything else, some simply being 11 and hungry and more resilient than adults generally gave children credit for. Who was I supposed to go to? Harry asked. The will doesn't appear in any of these books, Hermione said carefully. But there are ways to access it. Gringotts holds copies of all magical wills executed in Britain. As the named heir, you have the right to request it. I know, Harry said. I told Dumbledore last night that I'd go to Gringotts if necessary. She blinked. That was bluffing. It was more of a statement of intent. He picked up his toast again, resumed eating. Now it's an actual plan. Ron dropped into the seat beside Harry with a plate piled high in a way that suggested he'd been awake and thinking and had concluded that the appropriate response involved a large breakfast. All right, he said, with the tone of someone entering a conversation they've been mentally rehearsing. I talked to Percy last night. How was that? Harry asked. Percy is in the middle of believing everything is fine and also believing everything is terrible and currently alternating between the two every 4 minutes. Ron stabbed a sausage. But he said something useful, actually, before he went back to polishing his badge. He said the Hat has never, in the entire recorded history of Hogwarts, has never broadcast anything. Its readings are always private. It's one of the oldest enchantments in the school and the privacy of the sorting is basically, it's like law. No one has ever heard anything the Hat found in a student's mind. Not once. Until last night, Harry said. Until last night. Ron pointed his fork. What I'm saying is, that means whatever the Hat found was, Percy's word was, unprecedented. Which Percy uses for things that are either very good or very catastrophic with nothing in between. He ate the sausage. He also said 3 members of the Board of Governors were already owling the school this morning. And the minister's office sent a letter. I saw the owls, Harry said. My mum's going to lose her mind, Ron said, not unhappily. She thinks Dumbledore hangs the moon. This is, for our family this is like finding out, he searched for the right comparison. Like finding out the Chudley Cannons have been cheating for 40 years. I'd still support them, but I'd need a sit-down. From down the table, Neville had been listening. He hadn't spoken yet this morning. Harry had watched him come in, take his seat, eat methodically without looking at anyone, with the particular focused silence of someone carrying something heavy. Now he looked up and said, very quietly, he chose Harry. The nearby section of table went quieter. The prophecy, Neville said. Still quiet. Still controlled. It could have meant me. Anyone who's studied the prophecy knows, it could have meant either of us. Born at the end of July, to parents who defied Voldemort 3 times. He wasn't looking at Harry. He was looking at the table. He chose Harry. And after he chose Harry, the Death Eaters came for my family instead. And he stopped. He knew they were targets. He had to have known. If he was watching us both closely enough to choose between us, he was watching closely enough to know my parents were in danger. The table was quite silent now. I don't know, Harry said carefully, because he didn't, not for certain. He didn't want to hand Neville a certainty he didn't have. "I know," Neville said. He looked up, and his eyes were dry and his jaw was set and he looked absolutely nothing like the boy who'd lost his toad on the train. "I've been thinking about it all night." If he knew, and he let them, if he prioritized, he stopped again. "My parents have been in St. Mungo's for 10 years. My gran raises me and she tells me to be proud of them, and I am proud of them," but, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Harry reached across and put his hand on Neville's arm for exactly 2 seconds, then let go. It was not a comforting gesture, it wasn't meant to be, because comfort wasn't what Neville needed. It was a gesture that said, "I heard you and I'm not going to pretend it's all right." Neville seemed to understand that. He nodded, once, and went back to his breakfast. The morning's first class was Transfiguration, and Professor McGonagall arrived 3 minutes early, turned a desk into a pig and back again to demonstrate the lesson's objective, and then looked at the class with the expression of a woman who had fully decided to behave as though yesterday evening had been a minor administrative irregularity. "You will each attempt to transfigure your matchstick into a needle," she said. "The technique is precise. It is not emotional. I trust you can all manage to separate technique from emotion for the next 50 minutes. Harry thought she was talking to herself as much as to them. He managed the matchstick on his 4th attempt. It didn't fully transform, the needle retained a faint grain of wood along one edge, but McGonagall stopped at his desk, examined it, and said "adequate," which he was beginning to understand was her version of "well done." Hermione had done it on her 2nd attempt. She was now reading under the desk while the rest of the class caught up. After class, as the students filtered out into the corridor, McGonagall said, "Mr. Potter." "A word." Harry waited while the others left. Hermione hovered in the doorway until he gave a small nod, and she went, though he suspected she would wait in the corridor. McGonagall stood at her desk and looked at him with the specific expression she'd been wearing since last night, the one that kept its composure through what appeared to be structural effort. "I want you to know," she said, "that I was not aware of, the full extent of, the arrangements concerning your placement with your relatives." "I believe you," Harry said. Something in her shoulders shifted slightly, relief, maybe, or the absence of a braced anticipation. "I'm telling you because I want you to understand that what I am doing now is not because I was involved. I'm doing it because I have a responsibility to students in this school, and in 40 years of teaching I have never," she stopped. "Started again. I sent a letter to the Board of Governors this morning. My own. Independent of the headmaster's response. I outlined what the Sorting Hat revealed and requested a formal review." Harry studied her. "Does Dumbledore know you did that?" "Not yet." A crisp pause. "He will. Are you all right with the consequences of that?" She looked at him with something that might, on a different face, have been slight amusement. "Mr. Potter, I have been teaching Transfiguration at this school for longer than your parents were alive. I am not particularly concerned about the consequences." She straightened a stack of papers that didn't need straightening. "I also want to say, what you did last night, on that stool, was either very brave or very reckless and I haven't decided which. Can it be both? In my experience, the two are rarely distinguishable." She looked at him directly. "Is there anything you need?" He thought about it seriously, which seemed to catch her off guard, as if she'd expected a polite "no, I'm fine." "I'm going to need access to the restricted section," he said. "Hermione's already started but we need more than she can get through on her own. And I'd like to know if there's a way to contact a Gringotts representative from inside the school." McGonagall looked at him for a long, measured moment. Then she opened her desk drawer and took out 2 things, a signed library permission form and a small card with the Gringotts crest embossed in gold. "The bank maintains a correspondence owl at Hogsmeade," she said, sliding both across the desk. "This card identifies you as a named account holder and requests a meeting. I imagine they'll respond promptly, given the circumstances." Harry took both. "Thank you, Professor." "Don't thank me yet," she said, which seemed to be her standard response to gratitude. I may be making everything considerably more complicated. Things are already considerably complicated, Harry said. Complicated is fine. I just want them to be honest. She made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but in the family of one, and turned back to her papers. Snape caught him between Transfiguration and History of Magic. Not dramatically, there was no swirling of robes or stepping from shadows or any of the theater Harry would come to associate with Snape's more performative moments. He was simply there, suddenly, falling into step beside Harry in the corridor with the casual deliberateness of someone who had positioned themselves and was pretending they hadn't. "Walk with me," Snape said. Not a request. Harry walked with him. They moved away from the stream of students and into a quieter side corridor where their footsteps echoed and the portraits watched with the careful interest of people pretending not to listen. Snape said nothing for 20 steps. Harry waited him out. "What you said to the headmaster last night," Snape said eventually. "About the Horcrux being reversible." Harry glanced at him. "I didn't say it was reversible. I said I'd read his research notes." The implication was clear. A pause. "Where did you encounter the reversal theory?" Restricted section. There's a copy of Advanced Theoretical Dark Arts with the relevant chapter intact. Harry watched Snape's face from the side, the smooth, controlled surface of it, the slight movement of something behind his eyes that the surface kept in check. "You knew about the Horcrux." Snape said nothing. "Dumbledore told you," Harry said. Not a question. "You've known for years, probably. That's why you watch me the way you do. Not because of who my father was, though I imagine that's part of it. But because you know what's in my head and you've been," he thought about it. "What?" "Watching for signs. Watching to see if it was affecting me." A very long silence. "You're 11, Snape said." "People keep saying that," Harry said pleasantly. "I'm starting to think it's less an observation and more a wish." Snape stopped walking. Harry stopped with him, and they stood in the corridor and looked at each other, not the way a teacher and student usually looked at each other, which was from two different altitudes, but from something closer to the same level, which was new for both of them and clearly less comfortable for one of them than the other. "Your father," Snape said, "was one of the most arrogant people I have ever known." "I know," Harry said. Snape blinked. What do you mean, you know?" "The hat showed me enough of the school's memory to know James Potter was not universally admirable. I didn't know him. I know who he was to you is different to who he was to my mum and to the people who loved him." He looked at Snape steadily. "I'm not him." Another silence, different from the last one. Less controlled. "No," Snape said. "You're not." He said it like the admission had cost him something. "Then, the reversal theory is incomplete. I've read it myself. The conditions it describes are theoretically sound but the methodology doesn't exist. There is no known counter-enchantment." "Doesn't exist yet," Harry said. Snape studied him. "You intend to develop one." "I intend to understand the problem completely before I do anything else," Harry said. "But yes, eventually. If it can theoretically be done, then it can practically be done, given enough research. Hermione's already started on the theoretical side and she's been at it for one day and already found things that apparently no one else bothered to look for." "Miss Granger," Snape said, with the tone of someone updating a file. "She's brilliant. If you're going to be difficult with her in class because of who her parents are, I'd ask you to reconsider." Snape's expression shifted, a flash of something that was either offense or surprise, Harry couldn't tell which. "I beg your pardon." "She's Muggle-born. Some professors find reasons to undervalue Muggle-born students. I'd just like it on record, early, that I noticed those things." Harry said it without heat, without accusation, just information, delivered flatly. "I'm not trying to be antagonistic. I'm telling you because I think you're someone who respects directness." The corridor was very quiet. Your mother was Muggle-born, Snape said, and his voice was different, not softer, exactly, but stripped of something. The control was still there but something underneath it had shifted. I know, Harry said. Another pause. The research notes you asked Dumbledore for, Snape said carefully. He won't give you everything. He'll give you enough to demonstrate cooperation and withhold what he considers sensitive. You should be aware. Harry looked at him. Are you offering to fill in the gaps? Snape said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, I am offering to consider whether certain conversations might be mutually useful. He turned away. Don't mistake this for goodwill. I have my own reasons. I don't need it to be goodwill, Harry said. I just need it to be honest. Snape made a sound that might have been the faintest, most reluctant acknowledgement in the history of reluctant acknowledgements, and walked away down the corridor without looking back. Harry watched him go and thought that whatever Snape's reasons were, and they were clearly complex, clearly personal, clearly tangled up with his mother and with Dumbledore and with a decade of playing a role in a plan that had just been publicly dismantled, they were real. They weren't managed. And real, for Harry, had become the most important criterion. History of magic was taught by Professor Binns, who was a ghost and whose teaching style appeared to have calcified sometime in the 14th century and refused to update. He floated through his desk at one point, which briefly revived the class's attention before he droned them back into glazed semi-consciousness. Harry used the time to write. Not notes on the Goblin rebellions of the 17th century. He wrote a list, quickly and plainly, on a separate sheet of parchment that he angled away from the students on either side. Things I know, Horcrux in my scar. Fragment of Voldemort's soul. Dumbledore has known since I was an infant. Multiple Horcruxes exist. Unknown number, unknown objects. My parents will exists. I was not placed in accordance with it. The prophecy named either me or Neville. Dumbledore chose. Reversal of Horcrux theoretically possible. Things I need to know, what are the other Horcruxes? Where are they? What does my parents will actually say? Who knew what, and when? What is Quirrell? He paused on that last one. Added a question mark after Quirrell, then 2 more. Then he wrote, what is Dumbledore actually planning to do with this situation now that it's public? Hermione, beside him, had been taking immaculate notes on the Goblin rebellions. She glanced sideways at his list, read it quickly, and added 3 items of her own without asking, who currently controls Harry's vault access/inheritance? What are the legal mechanisms for contesting guardianship after the fact? Is there anyone on the Board of Governors who is independent of Dumbledore? Harry looked at her additions and thought that she was extremely good at this and that he was glad she was here, and circled her 3rd point. Lunch happened. The hall was loud again but differently loud than the morning. The initial shock had begun condensing into opinion, which was noisier and more chaotic but also more useful because it meant people were thinking rather than just feeling. Harry ate quickly, noticed that Dumbledore ate nothing but spent the meal in quiet conversation with Professor Sprout and Professor Flitwick, both of whom looked troubled, and logged this. He was halfway through an apple when the doors of the great hall opened and a person walked in who had not been there the previous evening and whose presence sent a different kind of electric charge through the room. She was medium height, extremely well-dressed, with white blonde hair pulled back severely and eyes that moved across the hall with the focused efficiency of a woman cataloging assets. She walked directly to the staff table without pausing to look at any of the students, which somehow made every student look at her, and she leaned down and spoke quietly to Dumbledore. "Who is that?" Harry asked. Ron, who had grown up in a wizarding family and absorbed its information the way other people absorbed oxygen, said immediately, "Cornelia Fawcett. She's on the Board of Governors." She's not one of Dumbledore's. Her family's independent, they've been independent for 3 generations. She has 2 kids at the school, one in Ravenclaw and one in Hufflepuff. He paused. She was one of the ones who had Dumbledore removed for a bit in, well, that hasn't happened yet. She tried before. Argued he had too much power and not enough oversight. She was outvoted. Harry watched her. She had straightened up from Dumbledore's ear and was looking at the hall now, really looking, sweeping the student tables methodically. Her eyes found Harry and stopped. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she gave a single, small, businesslike nod, like a person confirming something they'd expected, and turned back to Dumbledore. "I think," Harry said quietly, "that Professor McGonagall's letter found a very receptive audience." The afternoon brought a free period that Harry used in the library with Hermione and Neville, who had come quietly and without being asked and whose presence had a specific quality, focused, serious, slightly dangerous, like a whetstone being applied to something already sharp. He was working through a book on the First Wizarding War when he stopped and said, without looking up, "Did you know? Before last night. That the prophecy might have been about you?" Neville didn't answer immediately. "My gran hinted at it once," he said. "When I was 8. She didn't say it directly, she said the Dark Lord had considered our family important enough to target specifically, that my parents had been chosen as an example." He turned a page. "I thought that meant they were important because they were Aurors who defied him. I didn't think it meant, I didn't know about the prophecy." "Dumbledore told your family that the prophecy was about me," Harry said. "He would have had to explain why Voldemort went after us instead of you." "He told my gran that Harry was the one who'd vanquish him," Hermione said, not looking up from her own book. "That's public knowledge, the broad outline of the prophecy is public. What isn't public is the part about either child. The specific words. He controlled the information," Neville said. "He controls most of the information in the magical world," Harry said. "He's the supreme mugwump of the International Confederation and the chief warlock of the Wizengamot and the headmaster of the most important school in Britain. He doesn't need to lie outright about very much. He just frames things. And chooses what to include," Hermione added. Neville closed his book, very carefully, and looked at it. "I want to see the prophecy," he said quietly. "The actual words. All of them." "It's in the Department of Mysteries," Harry said. "Kept in the Hall of Prophecy. Only the subjects of a prophecy can remove the glass it's stored in." He paused. "Which means you and I could both access it." "We're 11, Neville said. "There it is again," Harry said. Neville almost smiled. "I don't mean we can't. I mean we'd need to be considerably more prepared than we currently are." "Agreed," Harry said. "It goes on the list." Hermione pulled his list toward her, wrote Prophecy, Hall of Mysteries, medium term at the bottom, and pushed it back. They worked for another hour. The library was quiet around them, with the kind of purposeful hush that felt less like silence and more like concentrated thought. Madame Pants watched them from her desk with the expression of someone who had never seen first years in the restricted section before lunch on the second day of term and wasn't entirely sure whether to be pleased or alarmed. Harry found something at the 4:30 mark. He found it in a dense and badly indexed history of magical theory that looked like it had last been opened sometime around the 19th century, in a footnote, a genuine footnote, the kind that serious readers skipped and the writer had buried deliberately. The magical bond known as sacrifice protection, see, Lily Potter case, 1981, earlier precedent, the Malvern family, 1693, is notable for its persistence beyond the initial sacrifice. Unlike conventional protective enchantments, sacrifice magic rooted in genuine unconditional love does not merely protect its subject but actively inverts destructive intent directed toward that subject, converting the destructive energy into something approximating its opposite. In theory, and this remains unproven, a sufficiently anchored sacrifice protection could be weaponized against its original intended target. That is, the very mechanism by which Voldemort failed to kill Potter as an infant might, if properly understood, be the mechanism by which any portion of his soul anchored within Potter might be extracted without harm to the container. Harry read this 3 times. Then he said, "Hermione." She came and read it over his shoulder. She was quiet for almost 20 seconds. Then she said, that's the protection my mother left me is the key, Harry said. That's the mechanism the theorists couldn't find. They couldn't find it because they were looking at it as a dark arts problem, how to separate a Horcrux from its container without destroying the container. But it's not a dark arts problem. It's the opposite. It's a love problem, Hermione said, and the way she said it was entirely scientific and also somehow the most affecting thing Harry had heard all day. Right. He sat back. And specifically it's a problem that involves my mother. Which means the answer isn't in the dark arts section at all. It's in charms and magical theory, Hermione breathed. She was already standing, already moving toward the magical theory stacks. The sacrifice protection is essentially a highly advanced charm. If we can understand the exact structure of it, not today, Harry said. She stopped. Turned. What? Not today. We've been in here for 2 hours and you didn't sleep last night. He was already putting his book back. Tomorrow. We take this one step at a time and we don't burn ourselves out in the first week. She looked at him with the expression of someone fighting a battle between intellectual hunger and good sense. Harry, the Horcrux has been in my head for 11 years, he said quietly. It'll still be there on Thursday. I promise. A pause. She deflated by a fraction, the specific deflation of a person who knows they're being sensible and resents it. Fine, she said. Tomorrow. Neville was watching this exchange with the mild interested look of someone observing a natural phenomenon. As they filed out of the library he said to Harry, very quietly, "You're good at that." At what? Keeping people grounded. Without making them feel managed. Harry glanced at him. The difference between keeping people grounded and managing them is whether you're doing it for them or for you. Neville thought about this. Then he said, "How old are you, actually?" 11, Harry said. Tragically. Neville actually laughed at that, a short, genuine, surprised laugh that seemed to catch him off guard. It changed his whole face. Harry made a mental note of it, the way he made mental notes of things that mattered. The letter from Dumbledore arrived after dinner. It was delivered not by Owl but by a sixth-year prefect who handed it to Harry with the expression of a person who felt they were holding a live component of something large and complicated and wanted to put it down as quickly as possible. Harry took it, thanked them, and took it to a corner of the common room. The letter was brief. 3 paragraphs. Dumbledore's handwriting was beautiful, sweeping, precise, the handwriting of someone who had written a great many important letters and understood that presentation was part of the message. The first paragraph offered an inventory of Harry's vault management history, as requested. The numbers were there, the withdrawals, the administrative fees, the dates. Harry read them and saw clearly that over 11 years, approximately a third of the Potter family vault had been redistributed through channels described only as maintenance and administration. The second paragraph explained, in language that was gentle and thorough and deeply careful, why Dumbledore believed his plan remained necessary. Voldemort was not gone. He was diminished, displaced, but not destroyed. The Horcruxes anchored him. The prophecy described only one way forward. The sacrifice Dumbledore had designed, the willing sacrifice, was not cruelty. It was calculus. One life weighed against thousands. He did not, the letter noted, expect Harry to accept this readily. But he hoped Harry would come to understand it. The third paragraph said, simply, "The research notes will be available to you tomorrow morning." All of them. Harry read the letter twice. Folded it. Looked at the fire. Ron came and sat beside him without asking what was in it. He just sat, the way that people who'd grown up in large families knew how to sit with someone without requiring anything from them. Harry found this enormously useful in a way he couldn't quite articulate. He sent the vault numbers, Harry said. Yeah. A third of it's gone. Over 11 years. Ron was quiet for a moment. That's a lot. It is. Harry looked at the fire. He thinks he's still right, Ron. That's the thing. He read the whole thing last night, the hat broadcast everything, he knows that I know, and he still thinks the plan is correct and that I'll eventually agree. Will you? Harry looked at him. No. Ron absorbed this with the steadiness he'd been showing all day, not the steadiness of someone pretending nothing was wrong, but the steadiness of someone who had decided where they stood and was standing there without drama. What are you going to do? Harry was quiet for a moment. I'm going to find all the Horcruxes, he said. Find them, destroy them. Make him mortal again. And when he comes for me, and he will come for me, the connection through the scar means he's always going to come for me, I'm going to be ready. He paused. But I'm doing it without walking willingly to my death at the end. I'm going to find a way to separate the Horcrux from me without dying. Hermione thinks that's possible. Hermione found the mechanism in one day, Harry said. Yes. I think it's possible. Ron was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Around them the common room did its evening things, cards, chess, homework complaints, someone's familiar knocking something off a table with a dramatic thud. Right, Ron said eventually. Then we'd better get on with it. Harry looked at him. I mean obviously I'm helping, Ron said, with mild indignation, as if this had never been in question. What kind of friend sits out when someone's trying to not get killed? That's a terrible story. He reached over and grabbed the letter from Harry's hand, scanned it, handed it back. The research notes tomorrow. We all go together. You don't have to, if you say I don't have to, I'm going to start hexing things, and I haven't learned enough hexes yet to make that impressive. He stood up. Chess before bed. Your mind's been running for 16 hours and you need to stop thinking for 45 minutes or you'll go mad. Harry stared at him. I grew up with Fred and George, Ron said. I know what an overloaded brain looks like. Come on. They played chess. Ron won the first game in 12 moves and the second in 9, and said nothing instructional about it, and Harry found that the quiet of concentrating on something that didn't matter enormously was exactly what his brain needed. By the time they went up to bed, the tight, constant hum of the day's information had quieted to something manageable. He lay in his four-poster in the dark and thought about the letter. About the careful, measured second paragraph, one life weighed against thousands. About the fact that it had been written by a man who was, by almost any measure, genuinely brilliant and genuinely good and had spent 50 years fighting a genuine evil. And had still looked at a baby and decided what that baby was worth. He thought about his mother's voice in the hat's broadcast, "They'll hate him, Albus," and the response, calm, kind, immovable, precisely. He thought about the footnote in the library book. He pressed his fingertips to his scar in the dark and felt the faint, patient weight of something that was not him, waiting. I'm coming for you, he told it quietly. Not Voldemort. The fragment. The piece of something else lodged in the space that was supposed to be entirely his. But I'm not rushing. I'm going to do this right. No response. But somehow the quiet felt different, less like absence and more like an acknowledgement. Down in the headmaster's office, surrounded by spinning instruments and 50 years of careful planning, Albus Dumbledore wrote, and revised, and wrote again, and thought about a boy who was not behaving like a mechanism. And in the dungeons, Severus Snape stared at the ceiling of his quarters and thought about Lily Evans, Lily Potter, and about a son who'd said I'm not him and had meant it in a way that had nothing to do with reassurance and everything to do with fact. And under his turban, something that was not quite Quirrell was thinking about a boy it had expected to be frightened, and wasn't, and was beginning to reconsider its approach. The castle breathed around all of them, old and patient as the hat that had started everything, keeping its own counsel, watching to see what would happen next. Chapter 3, What the Library Knows. The research notes arrived at breakfast wrapped in brown paper and tied with a green ribbon that Harry thought was either an attempt at peace or a very subtle reminder of who was in charge. He untied it without ceremony, set the ribbon aside, and spread the first page flat on the table next to his porridge. Hermione had her hand out before he finished opening it. He handed it to her. She was better at reading Dumbledore's handwriting than he was anyway. She'd already decoded the vault letter in under 3 minutes the previous night, muttering about inconsistent letterforms and ligatures. Harry ate his porridge and waited while she read, watching her face the way he'd learned to watch it, not for expression but for the specific micro-movements that meant she'd found something significant. The slight widening at the outer corners of her eyes. The way her breathing changed. She found something significant on page 4. "Harry," she said. "I see it." He hadn't read it yet. He was watching her face. "You're not even looking at the page. Your face told me enough." "What is it?" She turned the page toward him. Dumbledore's handwriting flowed across it in neat columns, dates down the left margin, objects in the middle, locations on the right. A list. 7 items long. Harry read it and understood immediately why she'd made the sound she had. 7 Horcruxes. The diary, already destroyed, a note beside it in different ink, newer, dated 1993. The ring, a Gaunt family heirloom, a note reading location known, retrieval dangerous. The locket, Slytherin's. Cave. Blood magic required. The cup, Hufflepuff's. Gringotts vault, Lestrange family. The diadem, lost, Hogwarts, room of requirement possibly. The snake, Nagini, Voldemort's familiar, must be alive to function, complication. And then the last one, written in a different hand from the rest, McGonagall's, Harry thought, though he had barely seen it. A single word, unknown. And then below that, in Dumbledore's own hand again, a note so small he almost missed it, the boy. Unintentional. Must die. Ron, reading over Harry's shoulder, went very quiet. He made a list, Harry said. He knew all of them and he made a list and he kept it in notes and he stopped. He wasn't going to tell me until the end. Until right before he needed me to go. He was going to walk you through some of them, Hermione said carefully, working through it. Probably. Let you feel like you were part of it. Give you the sense of agency that would make the final, she couldn't finish the sentence. Make me feel like it was my choice, Harry said. Yes. While ensuring the entire shape of my life had been designed to lead me to that choice. He looked at the list again. 7. 1 already gone. 1 in a vault he couldn't access without a very complicated heist. 1 requiring blood magic in a cave. 1 somewhere in this building. 1 alive and currently wrapped around a dark wizard. 1 unknown. And 1 in his own skull. He picked up his spoon, finished his porridge. Right, he said. 7 items. 1 of which is me. We eliminate me from the list, that's 6. 1's already gone, that's 5. We find the other 5 and destroy them and Voldemort becomes mortal. Ron said, just 5 impossible things before breakfast. Breakfast is already happening, Harry said. So technically it's before lunch. Marginally more achievable, yes. Neville had been reading the list in silence. He looked up now with an expression that had something very focused in it. The Gaunt ring, he said. It says retrieval is dangerous. What kind of dangerous? Dark curses. The object itself is cursed, heavily. You'd need someone who could identify and neutralize the curse before touching it. Harry looked at Neville. Why? My Gran knows about the Gaunts. She knows about most pureblood families, she says it's her duty to know who's who and what they've done. She told me once that the Gaunt family had an heirloom that was supposed to carry a killing curse on it. Anyone who touched it uninvited died. He paused. She called it justice, because of what the Gaunts were. But she knew where the house was. Where? Little Hangleton. In a ruined house there. He looked at the list again. That's not far from here, relatively speaking. We're 11, Harry said. I know. Neville's jaw set. I'm not saying we go today. I'm saying we have the information and we should use it. Agreed, Harry said. It goes on the list. Hermione was already writing. The restricted section of the Hogwarts library at 9 on a Wednesday morning was one of the quieter places in the building. Most students who needed it came in the evenings, under the cover of general library traffic. Coming in the morning felt faintly conspicuous, which was perhaps why Madame Pants looked at Harry, Hermione, and Neville with the particular expression of someone expecting something unusual and bracing accordingly. Harry showed her McGonagall's permission slip. She examined it with the thoroughness of someone who had seen forged documents before and wanted everyone to know she had, then handed it back and said, "No eating, no drinking, no loud conversations, and if any of the books bite you it is not the library's responsibility." "Have any of them bitten someone?" Ron asked from behind Harry. 3 incidents this year alone, Madame Pants said. And the year hasn't properly started. She led them through the gate to the restricted section and left them to it, which felt like being given the keys to a room that was both a treasure house and a moderate physical hazard. The restricted section was darker than the main library, the shelves were closer together and the books had a specific quality, a kind of density, like they were aware of being watched. Hermione went immediately to magical theory. Neville went to pureblood history and dark family records. Ron went to practical defensive magic with the air of someone who had decided that the best thing he could contribute was ensuring they all survived long enough to use whatever Hermione found. Harry went to soul magic. Soul magic was shelved in the furthest corner, as if the library itself had developed opinions about how easy it should be to access. The books there had titles that read like warnings: The Bisection of the Self, On the Fragility of the Eternal, Soul Anchoring and Its Consequences. Harry pulled 3 from the shelves and carried them to the central table and started reading. He read for 40 minutes before he found anything useful and then found 3 things in rapid succession, which was how research worked: long stretches of information that built a foundation, then a cluster of breakthroughs that only made sense because of the foundation. The first thing, soul magic, was, fundamentally, magic about connection. Every spell that touched the soul, binding magic, sacrifice magic, the magic that animated a Horcrux, worked because souls were connective by nature. They reached toward other things. A soul fragment didn't just anchor in an object or a person, it formed a bridge. A two-way bridge. Which meant the Horcrux in Harry's scar wasn't a one-way intrusion. It was a link. And links, unlike intrusions, could be severed from either end. The second thing, sacrifice protection, the specific kind his mother had cast, left a residue. Not a faint one. The books described it as the most persistent magical signature in existence, more durable than most enchantments and more deeply embedded in the person it protected than even the person themselves generally knew. It was built into him at a cellular level, in magical terms. It hadn't faded. 11 years later, it was still there, still active, still inverting destructive intent directed at him. The third thing, and this was the one that made him sit very still for a long moment, was a passage in a text so old the Latin was archaic even by Latin standards, in a book called De Anima Divisa that had been written sometime in the 13th century and had apparently not been read since approximately 1743, based on the bookmark left inside it. The passage, roughly translated by Harry who had approximately 4 months of Latin from primary school and was doing his absolute best, described a phenomenon the author called reflexio, reflection, wherein sacrifice magic strong enough to anchor in a living body could, theoretically, be reflected back through any soul link connected to that body. Like a mirror. You shone a destructive force at the mirror and the mirror sent it back at the source. The source, in this case, being Voldemort. Harry sat back and stared at the shelf across from him for a long time. The soul fragment in his scar was a link to Voldemort. The sacrifice protection was a permanent mirror capable of reflecting destructive magic back through any soul link. If the fragment could be activated, pushed, essentially, at the right moment, using the right trigger, he needed Hermione. He stood up and went to find her. She was 3 stacks over, cross-legged on the floor with 4 books open around her and a notebook already half full. She looked up when he appeared and he could see she was also on the edge of something. Her eyes had that look again. "You first," he said. She pointed to a paragraph in the open book at her knee. He crouched and read it. The passage was from a theory text about sacrifice charm mechanics, and it described, in considerably more advanced language than the footnote he'd found yesterday, the exact structure of Lily Potter's sacrifice. What it said, fundamentally, was that the sacrifice had created not just a shield but a permanent rewriting of the magical signature of everyone it protected, which was Harry, only Harry, because she had died for him specifically. The signature rewrite meant that certain categories of magic simply could not function correctly in his presence. Dark magic keyed to his specific destruction would consistently fail, reflect, or invert. "It confirms what I found," Harry said. "You found something too." He told her about de anima divisa. About reflexio. About the two-way nature of soul links. He watched her face as he talked, the rapid integration of new information, the way she cross-referenced it in real time against what she already knew. "If you could push the fragment," she said slowly, working through it. "Activate it deliberately, make it behave like a signal being sent, then the protection would treat it as a destructive force directed at me," Harry said. "And reflect it back. Through the link. Straight to the source." He paused. "And if Voldemort's body is destroyed, even temporarily, the fragment loses its anchor. A Horcrux fragment separated from its anchor is just a loose piece of soul. No container, no grounding. It would dissipate." She was very quiet. "Then, you'd need to know how to activate the fragment deliberately. That's the piece we don't have yet." "His emotions," Harry said. "Through the scar. I can already feel them, I felt them the night the hat screamed. I could feel him noticing the broadcast, feeling it through the link. Strong emotions travel through the connection." He touched his scar. "If I made him angry enough, or afraid enough, the emotional surge through the link would activate the fragment. And the protection would catch it and reflect it. In theory. In theory." She was writing now, fast, the notebook filling up. "This is, Harry, if this works, it's a long way from working," he said. "It's a theory built on 3 sources and a Latin text from the 13th century that I couldn't fully translate. We need more than this before anything happens. Obviously." She was still writing. "But it's a direction. It's an actual direction." She looked up. "Do you know how long I've been reading and every single source just says, the Horcrux cannot be removed without destroying the container, as if that's the end of the discussion. Nobody looked at the container. Nobody thought about what was already in the container and how that might change things. Dumbledore did," Harry said quietly. She stopped writing. "He knew about the sacrifice protection. He's known about it longer than anyone. And he looked at it and he decided it was useful for keeping me alive until the right moment, not as a mechanism for solving the problem without my death." He picked up the De Anima Divisa text. He had access to this library his entire career. 40 years as a professor and headmaster. He could have found this. He set the book down. He didn't look. Hermione's expression was very careful. Maybe he looked and didn't find it. "Maybe," Harry said. "Or maybe he found it and saw that it required something he hadn't planned for, an active, willing, informed Harry rather than a passive, ignorant one, and put it aside." They looked at each other. "We need more sources," Hermione said. "I know. And we need someone who understands soul magic at a practical level. The theory is here but the application is, this is seriously advanced magic. This isn't something we can research our way into performing. We'd need someone who," "Snape," Harry said. She blinked. "Snape. He's a potions master and a defense expert and he's been studying dark magic for 20 years. He also has reasons of his own to want this resolved that aren't connected to Dumbledore's plan." Harry stacked his books. "And he already opened the door yesterday. He said it wasn't goodwill. I know. I don't need it to be. Snape was in his classroom at noon, which Harry had confirmed by the simple method of asking a portrait in the corridor outside the dungeon stairs, who had confirmed it with the slightly affronted air of a portrait that felt it was being used as a surveillance network. Harry knocked, waited 3 seconds, and went in. Snape was marking papers. He looked up with the expression of a man who had been expecting an interruption and had decided in advance to be displeased about it. His eyes moved from Harry to Hermione to Neville behind them, and the displeasure gained a layer of complexity. "Mr. Potter," he said. "I have a class in 2 hours." "I know. I'll be brief." Harry set the De Anima Divisa text on the nearest desk, opened it to the relevant passage, and waited. Snape looked at the book. At the passage. At Harry. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind it, the particular shift of a person encountering something they hadn't expected and recalibrating. He came around his desk, leaned over, and read. He read the passage 3 times. Harry watched him do it. Then Snape straightened up and said, "Where did you find this?" "Restricted section. It hasn't been read since 1743. I'm aware of when it was last read." A pause. "I catalogued the restricted section in my second year here as a staff member. Every book." He looked at the passage again. "I read this. I dismissed it as speculative. Did you know about the Horcrux in my scar when you read it?" A silence. "Yes," Snape said. "And you still dismissed it." The conditions described are," he stopped. Started again, and Harry had the impression of a man dismantling something carefully constructed because the construction had been shown to be flawed. The theory requires a number of concurrent factors. The sacrifice protection, the soul link, a deliberate triggering mechanism. I considered the probability of all 3 being simultaneously present and correctly applied and deemed it unlikely, Harry said. Yes. But possible. Another silence. Theoretically, Snape said. He said it like the word cost him something. Right. Harry pulled up a stool and sat down, which was apparently sufficiently presumptuous that Snape's eyes narrowed, but he didn't object. Here's what we have. Harry laid it out, the Reflexio principle, Hermione's confirmation of the sacrifice protection's permanent signature, the two-way nature of soul links, the triggering mechanism through strong emotional surges. He laid it out quickly and plainly, no embellishment, the way he'd found Snape responded to best. Snape listened without interrupting, which was itself a form of engagement Harry recognized. When Harry finished, Snape was quiet for a long time. "The triggering mechanism is the weakest point," Snape said finally. "The emotional surge theory is correct. I've observed the scar connection since your first night here. You felt Quirrell's proximity to me at the sorting feast." Harry went still. "That was you?" "His turban." "What's inside it?" "You felt discomfort when Quirrell was near me. I observed you reach for your scar briefly. The fragment in your scar is sensitive to its source's presence." Snape's voice was very controlled. "Quirrell is, I know what Quirrell is," Harry said. Snape looked at him. "He has Voldemort in his turban," Harry said. "Literally or metaphorically? He's possessed or hosting or serving as a vessel somehow. It's the simplest explanation for why a nervous, stuttering professor has a soul fragment in his vicinity that affects my scar." A long pause. "You are 11 years old," Snape said, but not in the way the others had said it, not as a protest against the reality of Harry's situation, more as a genuine, slightly strained observation about the fundamental unusualness of the conversation he was having. "I'm aware," Harry said. "Does Dumbledore know about Quirrell?" "Yes. And he's letting it play out. He believes he can control the situation." Snape's mouth was a thin line. "He believes Quirrell is a controllable variable. He believes Voldemort, in his current diminished state, is manageable within the school's boundaries. He believes," Hermione said quietly from behind Harry, "that having Voldemort on the premises is useful." Because it keeps Harry in a controlled situation where Dumbledore can monitor both the threat and the response. Snape looked at her. Something in his expression adjusted, a fraction, barely visible, but there. "Miss Granger," he said. "That is a sufficiently cynical reading of the situation." "Is it wrong?" she asked. He didn't answer. Which was, Harry thought, its own kind of answer. "Professor," Harry said, and Snape's attention returned to him. "I need your help with the practical application. The theory is ours. What we don't have is the methodology, how to activate the soul fragment deliberately, how to ensure the protection catches it correctly, how to time the reflection." He looked at him steadily. "You're the only person in this building who has the practical knowledge to help us develop that methodology who isn't also invested in the outcome going a different way." "I am invested in the outcome," Snape said immediately. "I know. But not in my death." Harry held the eye contact. "You loved my mother." The classroom went completely silent. Snape's face did something complicated and controlled and ultimately very still, like a surface on which a great many things had moved and then been put back. "That," he said, very quietly, "is not a conversation I will be having with you." "I'm not asking you to," Harry said. "I'm telling you that I know it, and that it means your investment in my survival is real, and that I'm not going to use it against you or ask you to talk about it. I'm just, being honest." He picked up the Latin text. "I'd like your help. As an equal, not as a student asking a professor for a favor. What you know and what we know together is better than either alone." Another long silence. Snape turned away. Walked to his desk. Stood with his back to them for a moment and then turned around, and his face had the controlled neutrality that Harry was beginning to understand was not coldness but armor, the expression of a man who had learned to wear blankness as protection and wore it now out of reflex when something had gotten through. "Bring me your full notes," he said. "Everything Granger has compiled and everything you found this morning. I'll review the source materials." A pause. "I will not tell Dumbledore about this conversation." "I know," Harry said. "Don't thank me. I wasn't going to." Harry stood up. "Same time Thursday." Snape made a sound that was technically not an agreement but functioned as one. Harry picked up the Latin text. At the door, he turned back. "Professor. The gaunt ring. It's in Little Hangleton. The curse on it, could you neutralize it?" Snape's eyes narrowed. "Where did you, Dumbledore's notes? Could you neutralize the curse?" A very long pause. Then, "Yes. If I had enough time to examine it first. The Gaunt family used a specific class of bone curse. I know the counter-methodology." He looked at Harry with an expression that was somewhere between reluctant and something that might, very cautiously, be called respect. "You're building the whole list." "I'm starting from the outside and working in," Harry said. "The one in my head is the last problem. Not the first." He walked out. Neville, in the corridor, said quietly, "That went better than I expected." "He's not actually difficult," Harry said. "He just needs to know you're not wasting his time." "Most people are like that," Hermione said, slightly breathlessly, notebook already open. "They just need to feel like it's worth it." The letter from Gringotts arrived at 2 in the afternoon, not by owl but by a small, impeccably dressed goblin who appeared in McGonagall's doorway during what was technically the Transfiguration professor's free period, handed her a card, and stated that a representative from Gringotts Wizarding Bank would be available to meet with Mr. Harry Potter at his earliest convenience, that the bank took extremely seriously any indication of irregularities in the management of a named minor's account, and that the bank also took extremely seriously any attempt by third parties to restrict or redirect account access without proper authorization. The word extremely had appeared twice and both times with the weight of an institution that was very old and very certain of its own power. McGonagall walked the goblin to Harry's next free period at 3 o'clock, introduced him as Ragnarok, and then sat down in the corner of the room without being asked, which Harry appreciated in a way he didn't comment on. Ragnock was short, wide-shouldered, with hands that looked like they could bend iron and eyes the color of old coins. He sat across from Harry at the small study table and placed a folder on the surface between them with the specific care of someone handling evidence. "Mr. Potter," he said. His voice was precise. "The bank has identified several irregularities in the management of your accounts that we consider to require your immediate attention." "Please go ahead," Harry said. Ragnock opened the folder. First, the Potter family vault was subject to an administrative access authorization in November of 1981, approximately 3 weeks after the death of your parents. The authorization was filed by Albus Dumbledore and was countersigned by a ministry official, a Bartemius Crouch, who has since left office. This authorization granted limited management rights to a third party identified only as the Office of the Chief Warlock. "Which is Dumbledore's office," Hermione said, from beside Harry. Ragnock looked at her. "Correct. The authorization was filed under a provision typically reserved for emergency orphan account management in cases where no will had yet been located." He paused. "However, the Potter family will had been located. It was filed with Gringotts at the same time as the authorization, by the same official. It was not processed. The room was very quiet. It was submitted and then sat unprocessed," Harry said. "For 11 years, Ragnock confirmed. The will names a primary guardian." He looked at his folder. "A Mr. Sirius Black, godfather, is listed as primary guardian of Harry James Potter. Alternate guardians listed are Frank and Alice Longbottom." He looked up. "The Longbottoms are currently unable to serve as guardians due to their incapacitation. Mr. Black was imprisoned shortly after the events of October 1981 without trial." Harry looked at Neville. Neville looked at the table. "Without trial," Harry said. "He was imprisoned without a trial?" "Correct. Under emergency war powers provisions that required a ministry oversight signature. Signed by Bartemius Crouch." Ragnock said this with the absolutely neutral tone of a professional stating facts, and somehow the neutrality made it more devastating than outrage would have been. "Mr. Black has been in Azkaban for 11 years without a trial date. The Dementor Guard has prevented any subsequent legal review." Harry said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Is he guilty?" "That is not a determination the bank can make," Ragnock said carefully. "What the bank can confirm is that no evidence of the specific charges, betraying the Potter's location and the murder of 12 Muggles, was ever formally examined in a judicial setting." He paused. "What the bank can also confirm is that if Mr. Black is innocent, then the provisions governing your guardianship collapse entirely, and every action taken under those provisions, including the management of your accounts, becomes legally void." The air in the room was very still. "I want to pursue his release," Harry said. McGonagall, from the corner, made a sound. He looked at her. Her jaw was tight. It would require going through the Wizengamot, Harry. Through the Chief Warlock. "Who is Dumbledore?" Harry said. "Yes. Then we go around him," Harry said. "Through the Ministry directly. The Minister of Magic does not require the Chief Warlock's authorization to order a review of an imprisonment without trial, does he?" Ragnock said, "No. A direct ministerial review can be requested by the imprisoned party or by a legal next-of-kin representative. You are, as the named ward of the imprisoned party's will, a qualified applicant. Can the bank facilitate a formal request? We can transmit a legal brief to the Ministry's Azkaban Oversight Committee on your behalf." Given the circumstances, Ragnock's old coin eyes held something that in a goblin might have been the equivalent of significant interest. "We anticipate the Ministry will respond within the week." Harry thought about a man in Azkaban for 11 years for a crime that may never have been examined. He thought about the will sitting in Gringotts unprocessed while the right person was filed away and the wrong one was given access. He thought about Bartemius Crouch signing both documents and how that was probably not a coincidence. "Please send the brief," he said. "Today if possible." Ragnock closed his folder. The bank will also be pursuing the irregularities in your account management independently, Mr. Potter. The funds redirected over the past 11 years, approximately 38,000 galleons in total, are subject to recovery under the bank's fiduciary protection clauses. 38,000 galleons landed on the table in the silence like a stone dropped into still water. Hermione wrote it down. "Thank you," Harry said. "Do not thank the bank," Ragnarok said, standing. "The bank is acting in the interests of its account holder. This is not generosity." He gathered his folder, gave a small, precise bow, and walked out with the manner of someone who had just laid a very careful explosive and was walking away from it at a measured pace. McGonagall stood up from the corner. She looked at Harry with an expression so controlled it had to be covering something much larger. "The Board of Governors," she said. "Mrs. Fawcett has requested a full emergency session for this Friday. I've been asked to present a formal account of the events of Monday night." "I know," Harry said. "You'll be asked to attend. As a witness and, given what the bank has just said, as an interested party." "I'll be there," Harry said. "Can Neville attend?" McGonagall looked at Neville. Neville looked back with the quiet steadiness he'd been wearing all week. "The Longbottom family is named in the will," she said slowly. "Yes. I think there's an argument for Neville's attendance as well." She paused. "Harry. What you're doing, this isn't just about you anymore. If the Sirius Black review proceeds, and if the account irregularities go to formal investigation, and if the board session goes the way I think it might, this becomes a very large thing very quickly." "It's already a large thing," Harry said simply. "The hat made it large. I'm just trying to make sure it lands correctly." She looked at him for a long moment. "Your mother used to use that phrase," she said quietly. "Land correctly." "In my class, when she was working through a particularly complicated transformation." Harry didn't say anything. McGonagall straightened. "Friday. 9 o'clock. Both of you." She walked out, and the door closed behind her, and Harry thought that in 40 years she had probably taught a great many remarkable students and that she seemed, in some complicated and careful way, to have decided that he was one of them. He found he was glad of it. Dinner was quieter than it had been. Not the shocked quiet of Monday or the buzzing, recalibrating quiet of Tuesday. This was the quieter of people who had been processing for 3 days and had mostly arrived at positions and were now sitting with them. Positions varied. Half the Gryffindor table seemed to have concluded that the entire situation was terrible and that Harry was to be supported unreservedly. A quarter of the Ravenclaw table had apparently spent the week in the library reaching their own conclusions and were watching Harry with the specific look of people who had done research and wanted to discuss it. The Slytherin table was more complex, divided, clearly, between those who had family loyalties to Death Eaters that made Voldemort's vulnerability alarming and those who had family loyalties to people who'd suffered under Voldemort and found Harry's apparent resistance to being managed oddly satisfying. Draco Malfoy ate his dinner with a focused precision that looked like a person refusing to look up. He had not spoken to Harry all week. Harry had not spoken to him. The silence between them felt significant in a way Harry couldn't yet fully read. After dinner Harry stayed in the common room while most of the others filtered up to bed, sitting by the fire with his list updated to its current version. He read it once, added 2 items, Sirius Black, Parents' Will and Board Session Friday, and then sat looking at the fire. Ron sat next to him. "You all right?" "I have a godfather," Harry said. Ron blinked. "What?" "My parents' will. I have a godfather, Sirius Black. He was supposed to take me in when they died." Harry looked at the fire. "He's been in Azkaban for 11 years because someone sent him there without a trial." Ron was quiet. The fire crackled. "Sirius Black," he said slowly. "My dad talks about him. Or, used to. He was an Auror. A good one." He paused. "My dad always said there was something that felt wrong about the arrest. He never said it officially, it wasn't, you didn't question those things during the war, everyone was too frightened, and afterwards everyone wanted it to be over. A beat. He wasn't given a trial, Harry. Mum said once, very quietly, that it bothered her. But then she'd say Dumbledore approved it and he would have had reasons. Harry said nothing. Ron said, carefully, Dumbledore approved the imprisonment. Bartemius Crouch signed the papers, Harry said. But he would have needed authorization from the Chief Warlock for someone with Order of the Phoenix connections. Someone who knew about the Fidelius charm and could have been the secret keeper. He looked at the fire. Dumbledore would have known. He might have arranged it. Why? Ron's voice was very careful. Not disbelieving, carefully processing. Harry thought about the list. About the will sitting unprocessed in Gringotts while the wrong guardians were put in place. About the need for a child who would not grow up thinking too highly of himself. About the specific calculation of someone designing a life. Because if Sirius was free, Harry said, I would have had someone. A real guardian. Someone who loved my parents and loved me and would have raised me in the magical world and told me who I was and fought for me. He paused. And that would have made me much harder to manage. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the castle a clock chimed 9. We're going to get him out, Ron said. Not a question. We're going to try, Harry said. Right. Ron leaned back in his chair. I'm going to write to my dad. He doesn't know what I know, but he knows things I don't know. And he's someone Dumbledore hasn't, my dad thinks for himself. He trusts Dumbledore but he's not, he searched for the word. He's not captive to it. If I write to him tonight, do it, Harry said. Ron got up immediately and went for parchment, which was one of the many things Harry appreciated about him. He moved at the speed of decision, no wasted time between conclusion and action. Harry turned back to the fire. He thought about a man in Azkaban in the dark, surrounded by Dementors, waiting for a review that had never come. He thought about 11 years. He thought about what 11 years of Dementors did to a person. He pressed his fingertips to the window glass beside him, cold from the September night outside, and let himself feel it, the cold, real and immediate, the undeniable fact of it. He'd gotten good at using physical sensation to keep himself anchored when thoughts got too large. Behind him, the portrait hole opened and closed as Ron left. The common room was almost empty now, just a few older students bent over homework, the fire doing its slow evening burn. Harry looked at his list. At the last 2 words he'd written, Sirius Black. I'm going to find you, he said quietly, to the fire, which was not Sirius Black and couldn't hear him. But the saying of it mattered. It went into the air and became a thing that existed outside of him, something he'd committed to beyond the privacy of his own skull. He kept it there in the air between himself and the fire for a long moment. Then he folded the list, put it in his pocket, and went up to bed. At 11 that night, in the dungeons, Snape sat at his desk with the De Anima Divisa text open in front of him and Hermione Granger's notes, which had been slipped under his door at some point in the evening, neatly organized and cross-referenced with the precision of a published scholar, spread around it. He read, and annotated, and occasionally stared at the wall with the expression of a man revising the architecture of something he'd been building in his head for a very long time. He wrote, at the bottom of his own notes, in the cramped private shorthand he used when thinking, Reflexio requires willing participation from the protected subject. All previous readings assumed an unwilling or unknowing host. If the host is informed and cooperative, he stopped writing. Stared at the sentence. Thought about a boy who had walked into his classroom with a 1300-year-old Latin text and laid it on a desk and said I need your help. As an equal. Thought about Lily Evans, who had also done things like that. Who had also walked into rooms and laid down things that changed them. He closed the notebook. Poured the wine he hadn't touched earlier down the stone sink. Then he opened the notebook again and kept writing. Upstairs, at the far end of the corridor, Quirrell sat on the edge of his bed and was not, in any functional sense, alone. The thing beneath the turban was awake and thinking, and what it was thinking about was a boy who had not behaved correctly, not on the night of the sorting, not in the week since, not once, not in any way that the careful architecture of 50 years of planning had predicted. It thought about the scar. About the link. About the fact that it could feel, dimly and distantly, that something on the other end of that link was not frightened and was not dormant but was, the word it landed on was purposeful. Focused in a direction. It thought about this for a long time. Then it thought something it had never thought before, about Harry Potter, the boy it had marked as its equal and then tried to kill 11 years ago. It thought, be careful. Chapter 4, The Other Side of the Prophecy. The Board of Governors session was scheduled for 9 o'clock Friday morning, and by 8:30 the entrance hall of Hogwarts had more adults in it than Harry had seen since the sorting. They came in ones and twos through the main doors, shaking rain off their robes, exchanging the tight-jawed nods of people who were maintaining professionalism through what was clearly a significant amount of suppressed alarm. Harry watched them from the first-floor landing, elbows on the stone balustrade, while Hermione stood beside him with her notebook and catalogued faces. "That's Lucius Malfoy," she said quietly, nodding toward a tall, pale man with white blonde hair and a cane that looked ornamental and probably wasn't. He moved through the entrance hall with the ease of someone who considered himself to own every room he entered. "He's on the board. Has been for years. Dumbledore's opponents tried to use him to remove Dumbledore once, it didn't work, but only barely. He's also a Death Eater," Harry said. "Former. Claimed he was under the Imperius Curse when Voldemort fell." He watched Malfoy exchange a word with Cornelia Fawcett that appeared to go very badly for both parties. "He'll want Dumbledore weakened. Just not for the same reasons we do." "The enemy of my enemy," Hermione said, with distaste. "Isn't my friend," Harry finished. "I know. But he can be useful in the same room without being trusted outside it." Neville had come up quietly behind them. He was wearing his school robes properly, tie straight, which for Neville was a statement. "My Gran's here," he said. Harry looked. Augusta Longbottom was hard to miss, a tall woman in a formidable hat, walking with a cane she very clearly didn't need as a mobility aid but used as a kind of walking declaration of intent. She moved through the entrance hall with the specific energy of someone who had been angry for 10 years and had just been told there was a legitimate venue for it. "Does she know about the will?" Harry asked. "I wrote to her Wednesday," Neville said. "She wrote back yesterday." He paused. "She used 11 exclamation marks in one sentence." "Gran doesn't use exclamation marks." "That sounds about right," Harry said. Augusta Longbottom looked up at the landing, found Neville immediately, and gave him a single sharp nod, the nod of a general who has located her most important officer and is pleased with his positioning. The last person through the main doors before the session began was someone Harry didn't recognize, a small, round woman in a pink cardigan who looked at everything with wide, avid eyes and wrote things on a small notepad with a quill that moved faster than she appeared to be writing. She had the energy of someone at a party who knows something no one else does yet. "Who's that?" Harry asked. Hermione's expression flickered. "Rita Skeeter. She's a journalist for the Daily Prophet. She's not exactly known for accuracy." A pause. "But she has a very large readership." Harry watched Rita Skeeter survey the entrance hall with an expression of absolute professional delight. "How did she get in?" "She's probably been trying to get in since Monday," Hermione said. "Someone must have let her through. Either the board decided the session needed a witness from the press, or she found her own way. Or someone invited her deliberately," Harry said. Hermione looked at him. "McGonagall?" "McGonagall said she wanted things properly answered for," Harry said. "Having the Daily Prophet in the room makes it harder for anyone to quietly revise what happened afterward." He straightened up from the balustrade. "Come on. We'll be late." The session was held in a large classroom on the second floor that had been arranged into something approximating a hearing room, a long table at the front for the 8 board members who were attending, chairs facing it for everyone else, and a single seat positioned in the middle that had the unmistakable energy of a witness stand without technically being one. McGonagall sat to the right of the board table, which put her slightly separate from it. Dumbledore sat at the far left end, which technically made him part of the group and also slightly apart from it, the geometric arrangement of someone who was simultaneously subject and authority, which Harry suspected he had managed deliberately. Cornelia Fawcett sat in the center of the board table and ran the session with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had been waiting years for a legitimate procedural reason to be in exactly this position. This emergency session has been called under Article 12 of the Hogwarts Board Charter, she said, without preamble, which allows a full review of the headmaster's administrative decisions when evidence of significant irregularity has been raised. Given the events of Monday evening's sorting ceremony, and the subsequent communications received by this board from Professor McGonagall, Gringotts Wizarding Bank, and 3 separate ministry oversight departments, I think we can all agree the bar for significant irregularity has been cleared. Lucius Malfoy, 2 seats from Fawcett's right, said nothing, but his expression had the contained satisfaction of a person watching events unfold in a direction they'd been advocating for years. Harry filed this. Dumbledore looked at Fawcett with an expression of composed attention that gave nothing away. Professor McGonagall, Fawcett said. You were present at the sorting ceremony. Please describe what occurred. McGonagall described it. She was precise, unsparing, and used the specific language of someone who had decided that clarity mattered more than comfort. She described the hat's broadcast, what it contained, the details of Harry's meeting with Dumbledore, and her own independent letter to the board. She described it without embellishment and without excessive emotion, and somehow that made it worse. Events described in a controlled voice by a reliable witness were considerably more damaging than the same events described with distress. By the time she finished, half the room was completely still. Fawcett looked down the table at Dumbledore. Albus. The allegations are specific. I think you should address them directly. Dumbledore leaned forward slightly, folded his hands on the table, and said, I think most of you will understand, in time, that the decisions I made were not made from cruelty but from necessity. His voice was exactly as it always was, warm, measured, the voice of the wisest man in the room, which was infuriating because he was still, technically, the wisest man in the room even now. We are not at peace. Voldemort was defeated in body 11 years ago, but his soul persists, and the prophecy that describes his ultimate defeat requires specific conditions that I have spent decades carefully preparing. Those conditions, said a board member on Fawcett's left, a thin woman Harry didn't know, apparently included deliberately engineering a childhood of neglect for a minor in your care. The blood protection required the residence, McGonagall said. It did not require the conditions. Her voice was very level. You told me yourself, Albus, years ago, that Harry was safe with the Dursleys. When I asked you to reconsider, you said Lily's protection would keep him safe. You never told me the nature of what I was seeing in that street. You never told me what those people were. Minerva, I left a letter with a baby outside in the cold, she said, because I trusted your judgment, Albus. I trusted your judgment and you gave me incomplete information. You have done that to a great many people over a very long time. She wasn't angry. She was something colder than angry. And I would like the record to reflect that I did object, that night. I objected and you overruled me and I accepted that, and I should not have. The room was silent. Harry, sitting in the second row with Hermione and Neville, looked at McGonagall and felt something shift in him, not gratitude exactly, something more complicated than that. Gratitude plus recognition plus something that was, he thought, the beginning of trust. 3 hours into the session, it was Neville's turn to speak. He'd requested it formally, in writing, through McGonagall, 2 days before. Fawcett had agreed. Dumbledore had not objected, which Harry thought was either confidence or miscalculation. Neville stood up from his chair and walked to the single witness seat and sat in it with the composure of someone who had spent 2 days thinking very carefully about every word he was going to say. The room looked at an 11-year-old boy in school robes with a straight tie and waited. Neville looked at Dumbledore. He said, "The prophecy said either may be the chosen one." His voice was steady. "I know the full text because Harry showed it to me in Dumbledore's own research notes. Born as the seventh month dies, to parents who have thrice defied him. That's my parents and Harry's. Both. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Either of us." He paused. "You chose Harry. You decided he was the one." He looked at Dumbledore. "Why?" The room waited. Dumbledore said, carefully, "Several factors, was one of those factors," Neville said, and his voice didn't rise, not even slightly, "that choosing Harry meant you could control the situation more effectively. Because his parents were in hiding and easier to monitor. Because he had no surviving family to advocate for him. Because he was a better, a cleaner choice." "Neville, I'm not finished," Neville said. Not rudely. Just clearly. "After you chose Harry, Voldemort went after Harry's family instead of mine. But my parents were still targets. They were Aurors who defied him. You knew that. You must have known, if you were watching both families closely enough to choose between them, you were watching my parents. You knew they were targets." He paused. "You had Order members watching Harry's family. Did you have Order members watching mine?" Complete silence. "Neville," Dumbledore said, and for the first time his voice had something in it that wasn't managed, something genuine, something almost like pain. "Your parents were assigned protection, they were tortured into insanity on the 1st of November 1981, Neville said. The day after Voldemort fell. The day after you chose to believe it was over." His jaw was absolutely set. "Harry's parents died the night before. You mourned them. You came to the school that night and told Professor McGonagall it was a tragedy. My parents were tortured the next day and were you still watching? Was there still Order protection in place?" His voice cracked, just once, the single controlled fracture of someone who had prepared for this and was holding together through preparation. "Or did you stop watching because Voldemort was gone and you had a new plan and my family was no longer relevant to it?" The room was very still. Harry watched Dumbledore's face. He watched the composed surface of it, the careful management, the warm gravity, and he watched something move underneath it. Not calculation. Something older and rawer than calculation. Something that was, he thought, genuine and terrible, the face of a man confronting the actual cost of a decision he had made in the abstract, a cost that had been paid by real people in real bodies while he looked elsewhere. "There was a failure of intelligence," Dumbledore said. Neville looked at him. "The Order's network, in the immediate aftermath of Voldemort's fall, there was chaos. Members were being tracked, arrested, some were," he stopped. "Your parents' protection was, I believed it was in place. I was later told it had broken down. By the time I received the information," he stopped again. "By the time I received the information, it was already too late." "A failure of intelligence," Neville said. "Yes. My parents have been in St. Mungo's for 10 years, Neville said. They don't know who I am. My mum gives me a gum wrapper sometimes because she remembers she used to give me sweets and that's all she has left of the memory of having a son. And that's a failure of intelligence." The room was genuinely silent now. Not the working silence of people thinking. The still silence of people who were not going to speak because there was nothing to say. Harry had not looked away from Dumbledore's face once since Neville started speaking, and what he saw there, beneath the control, beneath the composed response, beneath the 50 years of careful architecture, was something he hadn't expected and didn't know what to do with. He saw guilt. Real guilt. Not guilt as performance or guilt as management, but the thing itself, old and lodged deep, the kind that doesn't move. It didn't change what had been done. It didn't change what needed to happen now. But it changed something smaller, the shape of how Harry understood the man in front of him. Not a villain. Not a cold strategist who had looked at Neville's parents and decided they were acceptable losses. A person who had made the choice to look at the larger picture and had genuinely not seen what fell out of it while he was looking up. That was different from not caring. It was its own kind of failure. Maybe worse, in some ways, because it was the failure of someone intelligent and devoted who had thought too hard about the shape of things and not hard enough about the grain of them. Harry kept that thought. Filed it where it would be useful. Neville stood up from the witness chair. He walked back to his seat. He sat down and looked at the floor, and Harry put a hand on his arm and left it there for a moment, and Neville's jaw tightened and he nodded once, very slightly, and they both looked forward. The session broke for lunch and reconvened at 2. During the break Harry slipped away from the others and found a quiet side corridor and stood at the window looking out at the grounds, which were very green and very wet with the morning's rain. He stood there for a few minutes just being still, which was what he did when he needed to clear the density of a morning from his head before the density of an afternoon. Footsteps. He didn't turn. "Impressive morning," said a voice he hadn't heard speak directly to him yet, measured, slightly drawling, with an edge under the smoothness that most people probably didn't notice. He turned. Lucius Malfoy stood in the corridor with his hands on his cane, looking at Harry with the same quality of focused assessment he'd been using all morning. Up close, his face was more interesting than it had looked from the landing. The certainty was there, the aristocratic coolness, but there was something working behind it. Something reassessing. "Mr. Malfoy," Harry said. "Mr. Potter." A pause. "I find myself in the unexpected position of owing you a degree of acknowledgement. This situation, the board session, the bank's involvement, the serious black matter, required someone to initiate it. You initiated it." He tilted his head slightly. "In your first week." "The hat initiated it," Harry said. "The hat was the instrument," Malfoy said. "You were the player." A pause. "My son speaks of you." "Does he?" "He says you're not what he expected." He looked at Harry with the focused attention of someone who had spent his whole life measuring people for usefulness. "I am also finding that to be the case." A beat. "You should know that my support in that room is not altruistic. I have my own reasons for wanting Dumbledore's authority curtailed." "I know," Harry said. "I'm not asking for altruism." "No." Malfoy looked at him for a moment. "You're being careful about who you take into your confidence." "I'm being honest about what I need and clear about what I'm offering," Harry said. "Those are different from taking someone into my confidence." Malfoy studied him. "You need the board to move against Dumbledore's account management authority. I can deliver 3 votes, mine, and 2 others who follow my lead on procedural matters." He paused. "What I want in return is straightforward. I want Dumbledore's authority over hiring and curriculum decisions subject to board approval rather than his unilateral control. Nothing to do with you. A governance matter I've been pursuing for years." Harry thought about this. Malfoy was asking for institutional check on Dumbledore's power. Which was, objectively, not a bad thing, regardless of Malfoy's reasons for wanting it. The danger was in the implication, that Harry was bargaining with him, that there was a relationship being established, that Malfoy could call on it later. "The vote on account management authority should stand on its own merits," Harry said. "The evidence is in front of the board. If those 3 votes require a separate deal to move, then the evidence isn't actually driving them, which tells the room that the votes are for sale, which weakens the whole proceeding." Malfoy's expression shifted. "A fraction. You're saying no." "I'm saying those votes should be cast based on what's right, not on what's exchanged." Harry looked at him steadily. "If you agree with the account management motion on its merits, vote for it. If you want curriculum oversight reform, make that case to the board separately on its own merits. I'll support it if it's genuinely a good governance idea, which I think it probably is." He paused. "But not as a trade." A long silence. Lucius Malfoy looked at him with an expression that had moved through several stages and arrived at something that was genuinely, clearly surprised. He had apparently come to this corridor expecting negotiation and had encountered something he didn't have a category for, which Harry suspected happened to Lucius Malfoy very rarely. "You're serious," Malfoy said. "Yes. You have a piece of the Dark Lord in your skull and you're 11 years old and you're refusing a very easy deal on principle." "I'm not refusing the outcome," Harry said. "I'm refusing the method. There's a difference." He picked up his bag from the floor where he'd set it. "If I start building something on exchanges and leverage, I end up with something that looks like what Dumbledore has. I'm not interested in that." He looked at Malfoy one more time. "Vote for what's right. That's all I'm asking." He walked back toward the hearing room. Behind him, Malfoy stood in the corridor for a long moment and did not call after him. Harry didn't look back. But he thought, as he walked, that whatever Malfoy did with that conversation, it had been the right conversation to have. The only conversation. His mother had been good at that too, apparently. At saying the true thing clearly and letting the other person decide what to do with it. He was starting to understand where he got it from. The afternoon session began with the Gringotts representative presenting the bank's formal findings, which were as comprehensive and devastating as Ragnarok had implied they would be. 38,000 galleons over 11 years. An unprocessed will. An account authorization obtained under false pretenses. The bank laid it out in the flat, precise language of institutional accusation, and each item landed in the room like something solid. Dumbledore did not deny any of it. He explained the necessity, the reasoning, the greater good calculus, and his explanations were coherent and in some cases almost persuasive, because he was genuinely one of the most intelligent people anyone in the room had ever encountered. But explanations are not the same as justifications, and by the time he finished speaking, every person in the room was doing the same calculation. The man was brilliant and probably right about the war and had still looked at a child's life as a resource to be managed. Harry, in his chair, kept his face entirely still throughout. He had decided before he walked into the room that his role in this session was to be present and visible and to say very little. Other people could describe what had happened. Other people, McGonagall, Neville, the Gringotts representative, could do the work of the morning. Harry being in the room was itself a statement. Harry being calm in the room was a stronger statement. He sat straight in his chair and let the room do what it was going to do. Fawcett called a vote at 4 o'clock. The motion was threefold: to suspend Dumbledore's unilateral authority over account management for any minor whose accounts were overseen by his office, pending a full audit, to formally request a ministry review of Sirius Black's imprisonment under the provision Ragnarok had identified, and to require board approval for any decisions regarding the guardianship or residential placement of students in Dumbledore's care. 6 votes in favor. 1 against. Lucius Malfoy voted in favor. Without a deal. Harry didn't look at Malfoy after the vote. But he felt, in some peripheral way, that Malfoy was looking at him, with that same quality of recalibration he'd been performing all day, like a very experienced navigator who has found a landmark they didn't have on their map and is updating accordingly. Fawcett declared the motions carried. She looked at Dumbledore with the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for a legitimate opportunity and was finding it more complicated than expected. "Albus," she said. "I want to be clear that these motions are not a removal from office. Your authority as headmaster in educational matters remains intact." "I understand," Dumbledore said. He said it simply and without effect, and somehow that was more arresting than anything else he'd said all day. McGonagall looked at him from the side and her expression did something complicated, something that held together 40 years of absolute respect and something new, something cracked through the middle. The session ended. People filed out, talking in clusters, board members comparing notes, Augusta Longbottom describing something to Fawcett in rapid, emphatic detail, Rita Skeeter writing so fast her quill was nearly a blur. Harry stood outside in the corridor and let the crowd flow past him and thought about the vote and what it meant and what came next. Hermione appeared at his shoulder. "The Sirius Black review," she said quietly. "If the ministry acts on it, they'll have to," Harry said. Gringotts is pressing as well. Two institutions requesting the same review, that's not something Fudge can ignore. He paused. He might try. Then we make it public, Hermione said, and her jaw had the particular set it got when she'd arrived at a conclusion she wasn't backing away from. Rita Skeeter is right there. Not yet, Harry said. Let the ministry respond first. If they drag their feet, then we make it public. In order. She nodded. In order, she repeated, making a note. Neville came out of the hearing room last, walking slowly. He looked tired in a way that was different from lack of sleep, the tired of someone who has done an emotionally enormous thing and the adrenaline has run out. Harry waited for him. Are you all right? Harry asked. Neville thought about it honestly. I don't know, he said. I thought when I said it out loud, in front of him, it would feel like something was resolved. He looked at the floor. It doesn't feel resolved. It isn't resolved, Harry said. What happened to your parents isn't resolved just because someone acknowledged it. That would take, he paused, thinking about what it would actually take, and the honest answer was something he wasn't sure existed yet. That would take your parents being themselves again. Neville looked at him. I don't know if that's possible, Harry said. I don't know enough yet. But I want to know enough. There might be, the healing field, for that specific kind of damage. He stopped. I'm not making you a promise I can't keep. I'm telling you I'm going to learn enough to know whether there's anything that can be done. You can't fix everything, Neville said. No, Harry said. But I can find out which things are fixable. He looked at Neville steadily. That's different from promising to fix them. Neville was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, thank you for letting me do that today. In there. It was yours to do, Harry said simply. They walked back toward the staircases together, and after a moment Ron fell into step from somewhere, appearing at Neville's other side with the uncanny timing he had for being present when presence was what was needed. He said nothing, just walked with them, which was Ron's particular gift and Harry was glad of it. Harry felt it at dinner. He was midway through a plate of food when it hit him, not pain exactly, but pressure. A spike of something dark and electric through the scar that made him go very still with his fork halfway to his mouth. Across the hall, Quirrell sat at the staff table with his face tipped slightly down, and the thing under his turban was, not dormant. Aware. Very specifically, pointedly aware. Harry set down his fork. Hermione noticed immediately. Scar, she said, barely above a whisper. Yes. He kept his face neutral, kept his body still. The pressure wasn't pain, it was more like sound, like something being broadcast on a frequency just below hearing. He focused on it, the way the hat had focused on the dark corner of his mind during the sorting. Tried to read it rather than just feel it. And through the connection, dim, distant, swimming through the link like light through deep water, he felt something he hadn't expected. Curiosity. Not malevolence. Not the cold predatory thing he'd braced for. Curiosity. The specific feeling of a mind encountering something unexpected and turning toward it. The Dark Lord, diminished and displaced and living under someone else's turban, was curious about him. Harry thought about that. About what the curiosity meant. About what it said about where Voldemort was right now, not in a position to act, not strong enough to impose, but aware and watching and trying to take the measure of something that had surprised him. He thought about the list. About the Horcruxes, 5 left, not counting himself. About a soul so fragmented it was scattered across objects and people and a ruined snake somewhere in Eastern Europe. About what it would feel like to have most of yourself in pieces, spread out and separate, to be diminished by your own survival strategy. He thought about this and then, carefully and deliberately, he sent something back through the link. Not words. Not magic. Just, awareness. The specific feeling of being seen and not being frightened. The feeling of someone looking at you directly across a great distance and saying, without hostility, "I know you're there and I'm coming for you, but not yet and not the way you expect." The curiosity through the link sharpened. Became something with an edge. Not fear, not yet, but the edge of something that might eventually be fear if it got more information. Harry picked up his fork and finished his dinner. "What did you do?" Hermione said very quietly. "Introduced myself," Harry said. She stared at him. "Properly," he added. "He knows I'm aware of the connection. He knows I'm not frightened. That changes his calculations." He thought about the list on his notebook. About "be careful," which was the closest thing to fear he suspected that Presence had felt in decades. If he's calculating, he's not acting. Calculating takes time. "Harry," Hermione said quietly, "you just deliberately made Voldemort aware that you know about the Soul Link." "He already knew about it," Harry said. "He created it. What I gave him was the information that I know about it too. Now we're even." He poured himself a glass of pumpkin juice. Information asymmetry is one of Dumbledore's primary tools. If Voldemort thinks he has information I don't have, that's another version of the same problem. I'd rather everyone know what everyone else knows. She was quiet for a long moment, turning this over. "You're either genuinely thinking several steps ahead," she said finally, "or you are going to be very dramatically wrong about something at some point and I would like to be standing slightly further away from you when it happens." "Noted," Harry said. "You can choose your blast radius later." She almost laughed. Managed to convert it into something that was technically just an exhale. "The Reflexio," she said, and her voice had shifted into working mode. "I've been thinking about the triggering mechanism all day. The emotional surge through the link, you said strong emotions travel through the connection." "Yes. You just sent something through it." "Deliberately." "Yes." "Then it's not just passively reactive," she said, very carefully. "You can actively use the connection. Both to feel and to send." She had her notebook open. She was already writing. "That changes the methodology significantly. If you can send through the link as well as receive, then I don't need to wait for an emotional surge from his end," Harry said. "I can initiate." "You can choose the moment," Hermione said. She looked up from her notebook. "Harry. If this works, if the Reflexio can be initiated deliberately, on your schedule, at a moment when you've prepared the reflection, then I don't need to be surprised. I don't need to be in danger." He looked at her. "I can do it on my terms." The word terms sat between them for a moment, and it was a good word for what he meant, not revenge, not a trap, but a chosen engagement on chosen ground at a chosen time, the opposite of everything that had been designed for him. It was what a player looked like, not a piece. "We need Snape," Hermione said. "To develop the reflection methodology. We have the theory but we need the practical casting structure and that requires someone who can." "Thursday," Harry said. "We already scheduled Thursday." "Right." She closed her notebook. "Right, yes." She breathed out. "I'm going to the library after dinner." "Hermione, I slept last night," she said firmly. "I'm going to the library. This is the most important problem I have ever encountered in my life and I have been encountering problems actively since I was 4 years old and taught myself to read from my parents' medical textbooks. I am fine." Harry looked at her for a moment. "Medical textbooks? My father's a dentist. The anatomy sections are quite informative." She stood up, tucking her notebook under her arm. "Don't wait up." Ron watched her go. "She taught herself to read from medical textbooks," he said. "Apparently," Harry said. "That's either very impressive or a sign of something." He picked up his fork. "Both, probably." Harry went to Dumbledore's office at 8 o'clock. Not because he'd been summoned, Dumbledore had not sent for him since the board session, which Harry thought was itself information. He went because there was a thing he needed to say and he wanted to say it before the silence between them became established habit. The gargoyle let him in. He went up alone. Dumbledore was at his desk, writing, and looked up without surprise when Harry pushed open the door. "Harry," he said. "No warmth engineered into it tonight. Just the name." Harry sat down. "You were genuinely trying to protect people," he said, without preamble. "I know that. I want you to know that I know it." Dumbledore looked at him. The war was real. Voldemort is real. The prophecy might be real or it might be self-fulfilling, which is a different question that I think you haven't looked at closely enough. But I understand that you weren't doing any of this from indifference. Harry looked at him steadily. You cared. You cared about the people who died and the people who would die, and you built a plan to minimize that, and you kept building it for 50 years, and the plan required me to be a specific kind of person, and he stopped. You tried to make me into that person. By controlling the conditions of my life. Because you thought the alternative was worse. Dumbledore was very quiet. "I'm not forgiving you," Harry said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't think forgiveness is the right word yet, and I'm not going to say it when I don't mean it." He paused. "But I'm also not going to spend my energy being angry at you when I need that energy for other things." He looked at him levelly. "So this is what I'm proposing. I'm going to solve the Horcrux problem. On my own terms, with the people I choose, in the way I determine. You're going to give me your full knowledge base, not the edited version, the actual version, because it'll be faster than me finding it all from scratch, and because the only difference between giving it to me now and giving it to me in 5 years when I've found it myself is how many people die in those 5 years. A long silence. "And in return," Dumbledore said. "In return, I'll tell you what I find," Harry said. "I'll keep you informed. Not because you're in charge of this and not because I owe you anything, but because you have strategic knowledge I don't have yet, and because 2 people working on the same problem from different angles are more likely to solve it than one." He paused. "Not a hierarchy. A collaboration." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The instrument spun behind him. Fawkes made a sound from his perch, soft, low, something between a note and a breath. "You came to offer me this," Dumbledore said. "After today." "Today clarified some things," Harry said. "I'm not here because I've forgiven what happened. I'm here because the Horcruxes exist whether we're in conflict or not, and because Voldemort is in this building right now under a turban, and I'd rather have your knowledge available than not have it." "Under a turban," Dumbledore said. "You know about Quirrell?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Since October," Dumbledore said. "He arrived at the start of term already hosting. I've been monitoring it carefully. The goal, as I understood it, was to access the Philosopher's Stone, which I've taken the liberty of securing in a vault beneath the school." Harry nodded. He'd suspected something like this from the fragments in the Hat's broadcast, a reference to something Dumbledore had moved for protection. "Is the stone the immediate objective?" "I believe so. Voldemort needs a physical body to rebuild. The stone could provide that." "Then we need to accelerate," Harry said. "The stone needs to be moved or secured with additional protections before he can act." He stood up. "I'll need the full file. All of it, every Horcrux, every location, every piece of research you have." Dumbledore looked at him with an expression that had, in the course of one conversation, moved through several versions of itself and arrived somewhere Harry hadn't seen on his face before. Not the composed warmth, not the managed patience, not the calculating assessment. Something older. Something that might have been, if Harry had to name it, the expression of a man who had spent 50 years making decisions for everyone around him and was being shown, carefully and without anger, what that had cost. "I'll have everything sent to you tomorrow morning," Dumbledore said. "Thank you," Harry said. He turned toward the door. "Harry." He stopped. "You said the prophecy might be self-fulfilling," Dumbledore said. "What do you mean?" Harry turned back partway. "The prophecy said a child would be born with the power to vanquish Voldemort. But power doesn't arise in a vacuum, it's shaped by what it's given to meet. Every choice you made to prepare me, to position me, to train me through controlled adversity, you were fulfilling the prophecy by acting on it. He paused. Prophecies need people to believe in them before they come true. The power you needed me to have was always going to come from somewhere. You just tried to control the source. A pause. The source, as it turned out, was me, Harry said. The actual me. Not the one you were building. He opened the door. Good night, Professor. He walked out. Behind him, the office was very quiet. Fawkes sang one soft note in the dark and then fell silent. Down in the dungeons, Snape read Hermione's latest notes and added 12 pages of his own in cramped, precise handwriting, and thought about Reflexio, and about Lily Evans, and about a protection that had been built from love and was apparently the most durable magic in existence. In the library, Hermione found a reference text that confirmed the bidirectional nature of soul links in language so clear it felt almost personal, and wrote at the top of her notes, "We can do this." And then, underneath it, more quietly, as if it was almost too large to put on paper, "He might actually be okay." In the great hall, the Sorting Hat sat alone in the dark. Thought about a boy who had picked it up by the brim and made his own choice. Thought about 1,000 years of sortings, children carrying their potential into rooms and the hat finding it for them, because children so often couldn't find it themselves. This one had found it himself. The hat found, for the first time in a very long time, that it had no idea what was going to happen next. It had decided, somewhere in the deep accumulated wisdom of its 1,000 years, that it rather liked not knowing. Chapter 5, The War Before the War. The Ministry Owl arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the board session, during breakfast, and it was the kind of owl that made everyone around it lean away slightly, not a standard post owl but a large, grey, institutional bird with the ministry seal on its leg and the manner of something accustomed to delivering news that rearranged people's lives. It landed in front of Harry with the precision of a thing that had been told exactly who to find and found him. Harry opened the letter while Ron poured himself more pumpkin juice and pretended not to watch. The letter was 4 paragraphs. The first established that the ministry had received Gringotts' formal brief regarding the imprisonment of Sirius Black. The second noted that after preliminary review, the ministry's Azkaban Oversight Committee had determined that the original commitment order contained procedural irregularities that warranted further examination. The third, and Harry read this one twice, stated that a formal hearing had been scheduled for the 14th of October before a panel of 3 Wizengamot members, that Harry Potter was listed as a requesting party and therefore entitled to send a representative, and that the prisoner himself would be transported from Azkaban to present testimony. The fourth paragraph was a single sentence, ministry formal and entirely flat, that nonetheless hit Harry like a physical thing. The prisoner has been advised of the hearing and has confirmed his intent to participate. Harry set the letter down. Well? Ron said, having apparently given up on pretending not to watch. He's alive, Harry said. Sirius Black. He's alive and he knows about the hearing. He looked at the letter again. Has confirmed his intent to participate. For words that meant a man in Azkaban, 11 years in, who had survived and was still capable of confirming intent, still there enough to respond. He's alive. Hermione read the letter over his shoulder, silent for a moment. Then, we need a legal representative. You're listed as requesting party but you can't appear in person, you're 11, McGonagall, Harry said. She might not be qualified to appear before the Wizengamot. She knows people who are, Harry said. He was already folding the letter. And she'll want to do this. She had 40 years of trusting Dumbledore's decisions. She'll want to do at least one thing that undoes one of them. He stood up, tucking the letter into his robes. I'll go before class. Neville had been listening from further down the table. He said quietly, my Gran appeared before the Wizengamot twice in the war. She knows the procedures. Harry looked at him. Would she? She's already angry enough, Neville said. She's been angry enough since the board session. She just needed a legitimate place to put it. A pause. She knew Sirius Black. She told me once he was one of the best Aurors in his generation. His voice was measured. She'll do it. Harry nodded. Then he sat back down, picked up his toast, and finished breakfast, because whatever was happening on the 14th of October was going to happen whether he ate his breakfast or not, and he had Transfiguration in 40 minutes. Ron watched him with what had become a familiar expression, the slightly odd exasperation of someone who kept being surprised by the same thing. "You're eating your toast," Ron said. "Yes. Your godfather is alive and there's a Wisengamot hearing in 3 weeks and you're eating your toast." "The toast doesn't care about the hearing," Harry said. "And I need the toast more than the hearing needs me." He buttered the second piece. "You should eat too. We have history of magic first and Binns is worse on an empty stomach." Ron picked up his fork with the air of someone who had long since decided that the correct response to Harry's particular brand of calm was to simply match it and ask questions later. McGonagall said yes before Harry finished explaining the situation. She said it in the manner of someone who had already been waiting for this specific question and had the answer ready. She also, within the following 48 hours, contacted Augusta Longbottom, arranged for both of them to serve as co-representatives, sent a reply letter to the Ministry outlining their credentials, and forwarded a copy to Madame Bones at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement with a note that, based on what Harry could read over her shoulder when she was writing it, contained the specific language procedural integrity and systematic failure of oversight 3 times each. He found this entirely encouraging. The days between the Ministry letter and the hearing were not empty days. The full file arrived from Dumbledore on the Wednesday morning, a thick, leather-bound packet of research notes, enchanted to be readable only by Harry and delivered without comment. Harry sat in the common room that evening and went through it with Hermione and Neville while Ron kept watch on the portrait hole, because old habits of privacy were not a bad idea even in a place that was nominally safe. The file was comprehensive. More comprehensive than Harry had expected, which meant either Dumbledore was being genuinely open with him or he was being strategically open, giving Harry the things he could find himself while still holding back the things he couldn't. Harry noted this possibility without dismissing it and proceeded accordingly. The Horcrux locations, as detailed, the diary, confirmed destroyed, 1993, by a basilisk fang in the Chamber of Secrets. That detail stopped them all for a moment. "There's a basilisk in the school," Hermione said flatly. "Was, apparently," Harry said. "According to the notes, it was involved in an incident in 1943. Riddle opened a chamber as a student." He read further. "Dumbledore suspects the chamber entrance is still accessible but the basilisk hasn't been confirmed active recently." "Hasn't been confirmed," Ron said from the door, in a tone that suggested he found the word confirmed doing a lot of work in that sentence. "File that for later," Harry said. Moving on. The ring, Gaunt family heirloom, Little Hangleton. Dumbledore's note read, Resurrection stone embedded in setting. Extreme caution, killing curse variant in stone itself. Do not touch without preparation. He had underlined Resurrection Stone twice and added a separate page of notes on it that Harry read twice and then set aside, feeling something complicated move through him that he didn't have time for right now. The locket, a sea cave, blood magic required, basin with a potion, an army of Inferi in the water. The note read, a Horcrux of exceptional cruelty. The measures taken to protect it suggest Voldemort considered it among his most important anchors. The cup, Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, Gringotts. The note read, essentially inaccessible by conventional means. Harry thought about Ragnarok and the bank's interest in the case and wrote a question mark next to inaccessible. The diadem, Ravenclaw's lost diadem, hidden in a room at Hogwarts that could only be found by someone who needed to hide something. The room of requirement. The note added, I believe I know its location within the room but have not retrieved it. The room's enchantments are complex and the diadem itself may be protected. Nagini, alive, currently with what remained of Voldemort. The note read simply, last. And then, in a section Dumbledore had written carefully, in slightly different ink, as if he'd gone back to it later, the Horcrux in Harry's scar. The note read, "The hardest truth. He must be the one to resolve this. I have not told him because I believed he needed to reach this point of his own volition. I still believe this. I am less certain I was right to wait." Harry stared at that last sentence for a long time. "He's updating," Hermione said, reading over his shoulder. "Look at the ink change, he added that section recently. After the board session probably. She paused. "He's reconsidering. Some of it," Harry said. "The important thing is the information." He set the file down. 6 Horcruxes total, 1 destroyed. 5 left plus me, which I'm counting as 6. We know where 4 of them are. The locket is the most physically dangerous to retrieve. The cup is institutionally difficult. The diadem is right here." He looked up at the castle ceiling as if he could see through it to the room of requirement. "The ring, Snape," Neville said. "Snape," Harry agreed. Thursday's meeting with Snape had become a fixture, a standing session in the potions classroom at noon that had evolved in 2 weeks from a cautious and somewhat combative exchange of information into something that functioned, if not quite like a collaboration, then like a working relationship between people who had decided to trust each other's competence if not necessarily each other's motives. Snape's notes on the Reflexio methodology had been, from the first session, extraordinary. Not theoretically extraordinary, Hermione had the theory well in hand, but practically extraordinary in the specific way that distinguished someone who had studied dark magic and its counters from the inside rather than from textbooks. He knew how soul-link connections behaved under stress. He knew which casting structures would amplify the protective signature versus disrupt it. He knew, from experience that Harry had the tact not to ask about directly, how emotional surges moved through magical connections and what shape they took. By the third Thursday session they had a framework. Not a final methodology, there were still gaps, still variables that needed testing, but a framework. A structure for what the Reflexio would require, a controlled moment, Harry aware and willing, the protective signature deliberately activated, and a trigger that would initiate the connection strongly enough to send the reflection back through it with sufficient force to dislodge the fragment. The question was the trigger. "It can't be external," Snape said, at the session that fell 2 days before the Wizengamot hearing. "The protective signature is keyed to Harry's specific magical identity. It responds to threats directed at him. An external trigger, someone casting a curse at him, for example, would work, but requires placing him in genuine danger, which introduces too many variables. So it needs to be internal," Hermione said. She'd been developing this line of thinking since Tuesday. The emotional surge through the link, if Harry can send through the connection as well as receive, then the trigger could come from him. "What kind of emotional surge?" Harry asked. Snape looked at him. "Something genuine. The magic responds to authentic emotion, it can't be performed or approximated. Sacrifice protection is built from the purest form of love in magical terms, the kind that acts without any expectation of return. What would trigger it needs to be in the same register." "Love," Harry said. "Not romantic love," Snape said carefully, which was clearly a sentence he found slightly awkward to say. "Not even, the word is inadequate. It's more precise than love. It's the specific act of placing someone else's existence above your own without calculation." He paused. "Your mother cast it in the moment she chose to die rather than step aside. The magic recorded that and embedded it in you. To trigger it, you'd need to feel something in the same family. Grief can do it," Hermione said quietly. "Real grief, the kind that comes from love, is in the same register. Theoretically." "Theoretically," Snape said, and something in his voice had shifted. "Yes." The session went quiet for a moment. Harry thought about all the things he could grieve. His parents, who he hadn't known. Sirius, who he hadn't met yet. Neville's parents, who were present and absent at the same time. The 11 years in the cupboard that he mostly held at arm's length because looking at them directly required a kind of time and energy he hadn't had yet. "I can find it when I need it," he said simply. "I know what I feel. I just need to know how to use it." Snape looked at him for a long moment. "We'll practice the activation mechanics," he said, which was as much agreement as Snape generally offered, and was, from him, considerably more than it sounded like. The morning of the 14th of October arrived grey and cold, a proper autumn morning with wet leaves plastered against the window glass and a wind that meant business. Harry woke before his alarm, which had been happening increasingly often, some internal clock recalibrating to anticipate important days. He was not going to the hearing. That had been the decision. His presence in a Wizengamot session as a minor would have complicated the procedure and given any opposing counsel grounds to argue emotional coercion. McGonagall and Augusta Longbottom were going. They were representing his interests. They were more than capable. He trusted them. He was still up at 5:30, unable to sleep, sitting at the window watching the grounds go from black to grey to the pale gold of early morning. Ron appeared at 6, which was impressively early for someone who treated mornings with deep philosophical suspicion. He had 2 cups of tea from the kitchens, handed one to Harry, and sat on the window seat without speaking for a while. This was one of the things Harry had come to value most about Ron, the quality of his silences. Most people filled silence because they were uncomfortable in it. Ron's silences were purposeful. He was present in them. "What time do they leave?" Ron asked eventually. 7. "The hearing's at 9. Augusta Longbottom looked like she was preparing for battle when I passed her in the entrance hall last week," Ron said. "I think she and McGonagall together might genuinely terrify the entire Wizengamot." "That's the goal," Harry said. They drank their tea. Outside, the grounds lightened slowly, the lake going from dark to silver to grey-green. "Do you know what you'll say to him?" Ron asked. "When you meet him?" Harry thought about it. "No," he said. "I think that's one of those things that has to happen when it happens." "Yeah," Ron said. "Probably right." They sat with that, and with the tea, and with the morning coming in through the glass. The hearing ran 8 hours. Harry knew this because McGonagall sent updates through the castle's portrait network, a system he discovered by accident when a portrait of a former headmistress had knocked on the common room portrait hole at lunchtime and offered to relay a message, with the slightly excited air of a portrait that had been waiting for an opportunity to be useful. At 11, preliminary testimony complete. Black present and coherent. Stronger than expected. At 1, Ministry prosecutor attempting procedural delay. Fawcett's contact at law enforcement has intervened. Proceeding. At 3, Peter Pettigrew. Then, 20 minutes later, he was alive. Faked his death. Cut off his own finger. Transformed. He's been living as a rat for 11 years. A pause that Harry imagined was McGonagall composing herself, and then, Sirius Black is innocent. Harry read this one standing in the corridor between classes, and his face went through something it almost never went through in front of other people, something cracked and open and completely unmanaged, and then he got it back under control in about 4 seconds. But Hermione was right there and she saw it and she put her hand on his arm and said nothing, which was exactly right. At 5, decision rendered. Black cleared on all charges. Pettigrew to be apprehended. We are returning to the school. At 6:15 Harry was in McGonagall's office. She came in still in her formal robes, looking like someone who had just fought a long battle and won it and was running primarily on principle and strong tea. She sat down behind her desk and looked at Harry, and for once the professional composure was not entirely in place. It was there, mostly, but around the edges it was something else. Something that looked like it might, if given a private enough room and enough time, become very messy indeed. He's been cleared, she said. I know. The portrait told me. She paused. He's physically, 11 years in Azkaban he's not well, Harry. His health is compromised significantly. He's been taken to St. Mungo's for assessment. The earliest he can have visitors is, she checked a note on her desk. 3 days. If the healers clear it. 3 days, Harry said. Yes. And Peter Pettigrew, a warrant has been issued. He was living as the Weasley family's pet. She said this with the specific controlled expression of someone setting aside the full implications of a statement because the full implications were too large to process in the moment. A rat. He transformed at some point during the hearing when he understood what was happening and, he escaped. Ministry Aurors are searching. Ron, Harry thought, was going to need a conversation about this. Ron, whose family had harbored, for years, a man who had betrayed Harry's parents. Not their fault. Entirely not their fault. But Ron was going to need that conversation and Harry was going to have it with him before anyone else got there. He thanked McGonagall and went to find Ron. He found him in the common room, and he could see from Ron's face that news had traveled faster than Harry. The portrait network worked in all directions, it turned out. Ron was sitting in the armchair nearest the fire and he was very still in a way that wasn't calm. Harry sat across from him. Scabbers, Ron said. His voice was flat. Yes. He's been, since before I was born. He was Percy's first and then they gave him to me. He stopped. He was in my pocket on the train. He slept on my pillow. The flatness in his voice was the specific flatness of someone whose mind was moving through a sequence of images and adding information to each one that changed the nature of it completely. He was at our house for 12 years. Ron. He killed Harry's parents, Ron said, and now the flatness broke open, just at the seam. He killed your parents and he was in my house for 12 years and he stopped. You didn't know, Harry said. I know I didn't know. I know that. It doesn't, Ron pressed both hands flat on his knees. It doesn't feel like that right now. No, Harry said. It wouldn't. He leaned forward in his chair. Listen to me. Your family gave him a home because he was a rat and rats are normal pets and you had no way of knowing. That's not on you. That's not on your family. That's on Pettigrew, who chose every step of this. He looked at Ron steadily. The only person responsible for what Pettigrew did is Pettigrew. Ron stared at the fire. His jaw was tight. Ron, Harry said. Yeah. I need you to hear me say that this is not on you. Actually hear it. Ron was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, with the effortful honesty of someone forcing themselves toward accuracy rather than feeling, I hear it. I don't feel it yet but I hear it. Feeling it comes later, Harry said. Hearing it first is enough. They sat with the fire for a while. Hermione came and sat with them at some point without being asked, which she was getting better at, the not asking, the just appearing. Neville appeared behind her, and the four of them sat in the firelight of the Gryffindor common room on the evening of the 14th of October and nobody spoke for quite a long time and the not speaking was its own kind of thing, complete and necessary. Harry's appointment at St. Mungo's was the 17th. 3 days exactly. McGonagall took him by Floo from her office, which was the fastest route and also, Harry suspected, the route she preferred because it allowed her to come with him without making a production of it. He appreciated the lack of production. St. Mungo's was louder than he expected and smelled like hospital but also like something specifically magical underneath, a clean, botanical smell from the potions that drifted down from the upper floors. McGonagall spoke to a healer at the 4th floor reception desk and they were directed to a room at the far end of a corridor. Harry went in alone. McGonagall waited outside without being asked. The room was small and white and had one window that showed a grey October sky and one bed and in the bed there was a man who was nothing like Harry had imagined and everything like Harry had expected simultaneously. He was thin, very thin, the thinness of someone whose body had been surviving on minimum for 11 years. His hair was long and tangled, grey mixed into the dark. His face had the hollowed quality of a person whose cheeks had forgotten how to be full. His eyes, though. His eyes were the same as in the one photograph Harry had of his parents' wedding, where a young, dark-haired man stood at the edge of the frame laughing at something off-camera, grey eyes, and sharp, and absolutely, unmistakably present. He looked at Harry from the bed and his expression did something that Harry would not have been able to name if asked, something that required a face to have been holding back for 11 years and then not holding back anymore. Something that was too large and too old and too many things at once to be just one word. James's eyes, Sirius Black said. His voice was rougher than it should have been, used up and raw. But not James's face. A pause. Lily's face. I'm Harry, Harry said, which was unnecessary and also, somehow, necessary. I know who you are, Sirius said. His voice cracked in the middle and he visibly steadied it. I've known who you are since before you were born. I was there the day James found out Lily was pregnant. I was there when you were born. He stopped. I was supposed to be your godfather. You are my godfather, Harry said. He sat down in the chair beside the bed. The role didn't expire while you were gone. Sirius looked at him. The expression was doing things again, the large, unmanaged thing. You got me out, he said. Gringotts helped. Augusta Longbottom and McGonagall did the actual work. You saw the will and you moved, Sirius said. James would have done that. James would have moved. He looked at Harry carefully, reassessing, the way people kept doing. But Lily would have known why. A pause. You're both of them. Harry thought about that. About being both of them, the moving and the knowing why. He thought it was probably the best description of himself he'd heard yet. There are things I need to tell you, Harry said. About what's been happening. What I've found out. It's quite a lot and some of it is going to be difficult to hear. He looked at Sirius steadily. But first I want to know if you're all right. I'm not all right, Sirius said immediately. I've been in Azkaban for 11 years and I'm currently held together with healer's potions and stubbornness. He said it with a directness that was, Harry thought, one of the most refreshing things he'd heard in a while. But I'm functional and I'm here and I want to hear the things you need to tell me. All of them. Every single one. Harry told him. He told him about the Hat's broadcast, about Dumbledore's plan, about the Horcrux in his scar and the others scattered through the world, about the board session and the Gringotts findings and what McGonagall had said and what Neville had said and what Snape was doing and what the library had found. He told it plainly and in order and without drama, and Sirius Black listened to every word of it with his grey eyes fixed on Harry's face and the expression cycling through things that had no easy names. When Harry finished, Sirius was quiet for a long time. Then he said, You're 11 years old. I know, Harry said. People keep saying it like it should make a difference. It should, Sirius said, and his voice was fierce, suddenly, the fierceness of someone who had been thinking about a small person in a cupboard under the stairs for however many days since the hearing had given him information to think about. It should make a difference. You should have been at the Dursleys for approximately none of those 11 years and you should have been with me and we should have been insufferable together and James would have complained about both of us and Lily would have managed everyone. He stopped. His jaw tightened. Instead you're sitting in a hospital room describing a Horcrux research program you've been running for 6 weeks with an 11-year-old team and a potions teacher. The potions teacher is quite good, Harry said. Sirius made a sound that was technically a laugh but had something more complicated inside it. Then he sobered and looked at Harry with the specific look of someone who is trying to decide how much weight a person can carry and whether adding to it is kindness or not. He seemed to conclude something. What you said, about the Reflexio, the triggering mechanism. He paused. Grief. Real grief, in the same register as your mother's sacrifice. He looked at Harry for a long time. You know that means you need to actually feel it. Not think it or describe it, feel it. I know, Harry said. The cupboard, Sirius said quietly. Your parents. Me. 11 years of, he stopped. You've been keeping it at a distance. Harry was quiet. You can feel it, Sirius said. You're allowed to feel it. It doesn't make you weak or slow or, I know, Harry said. And then, after a pause, more quietly, I know. There hasn't been a moment where it was safe to. He looked at his hands. If I let it in, I don't know what I do with it while I'm in the middle of everything else. You're in a hospital room with nobody watching, Sirius said. This is the moment. Harry looked at him. At the thin face and the grey eyes and the 11 years in them. At the person who should have been there and wasn't. At the shape of everything that had been taken, not just from him, but from both of them, from Sirius who had sat in Azkaban with nothing to hold on to except knowing he was innocent, from his mother who had argued against a decision and lost and died anyway, from his father who had laughed at something off camera at his own wedding and had 3 more years to live and didn't know it. He let himself look at all of it, fully, without the arm's length. And it was large. It was very large, and it was old, and it had been waiting, and it moved through him the way large things moved, not cleanly, not quickly, but completely. His eyes burned. He didn't bother managing it. He was in a hospital room with nobody watching except a man who had earned the right to watch. He sat with it for a while. Sirius said nothing. Didn't try to fix it or stop it or rush it. Just sat in his hospital bed and was present, which was exactly right. Eventually Harry breathed out slowly and looked at the window and felt, not better, which was the wrong word. Emptied of some pressure. Like a valve had been opened that had been sealed for 11 years. That, Sirius said quietly, is what the Reflexio needs. I know, Harry said. You'll be able to find it when you need it, Sirius said. Now that you've let it out once, it's accessible. He stopped. Your mum knew something about grief. She'd lost her parents, she'd lost her sister to the other side, she'd lost friends in the war. She said once that the people who learned to hold grief correctly, he paused. She said grief held correctly becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. Harry thought about that. Filed it next to land correctly, which apparently came from the same person. I want to know about them, Harry said. When you're well enough. He looked at Sirius. Not the war. The rest. What they were like in the mornings and what made them laugh and what they argued about and all the normal things that don't make it into other people's stories about important people. Sirius looked at him for a moment with the large, unmanaged expression again, and then he said, James's laughed at everything first and cried later, in private, because he was raised to think the second thing was weak and he never fully shook it. He was wrong about that. He loved your mum so much he didn't know what to do with himself in the first year after she said yes. He just wandered around being accidentally charming to everyone because he was so happy it overflowed. He paused. Lily made tea when she was angry. You could always tell how angry by how strong the tea was. She read everything, and remembered all of it and used it later in arguments and it was, frankly, terrifying. He stopped. Breathed. They were very normal in most ways and extraordinary in a few ways and they loved you completely and entirely from the moment you existed, which was before you were born. Harry looked at the window. The grey October sky had lightened slightly while they were talking, which seemed like something. I'll come back, Harry said. When you're stronger. I'll hold you to that, Sirius said. You should know, Harry stood up. I've told Dumbledore I'll share information with him. It's a collaboration, not a, he still knows things I need. But I'm not going back to being managed. He looked at Sirius. When you're well enough, if you want to be involved, try to stop me, Sirius said immediately. I won't try to stop you, Harry said, and the corner of his mouth moved slightly, the first thing approaching a smile that had moved across his face since walking in. I'll be back in 3 days. He walked out. In the corridor, McGonagall was standing with her arms folded and her expression contained, and when Harry came out she looked at his face, at what was probably visible there from the last hour, and she said nothing. She just handed him a handkerchief, very briskly, as if it was a standard piece of equipment that naturally accompanied all hospital visits, and turned toward the flue. He used it. Handed it back. They traveled back in silence, and the silence was a good one. Rita Skeeter's article ran the following Monday. It had not been Harry's idea, technically. It had been Hermione's idea, deployed after a weekend during which the Ministry had issued a statement about the Black hearing that managed to mention Dumbledore's role in the original commitment order in language so carefully vague it barely registered, and which had made Hermione's jaw do the thing it did when she had decided something needed to be done. She had sent Skeeter a note. A brief one, with 3 very specifically chosen facts enclosed, facts that were already public record from the board session but which had not yet appeared in the Daily Prophet. The letter had been followed by a meeting in Hogsmeade, Harry and Hermione under a carefully managed pretext of a Saturday trip, Skeeter sitting across from them in the 3 broomsticks with her quick quotes quill running and her eyes absolutely avid. Harry had spoken carefully and in plain sentences, which Skeeter would have to work quite hard to distort. Hermione had provided documentation. Between them they'd given her a story that was accurate, sourced, specific, and completely unavoidable. The headline read, "Boy Who Lived Exposes 50-Year Conspiracy, Headmaster Knew of Dark Object in Student's Skull Since 1981. It was 1,200 words of Rita Skeeter at the absolute peak of her abilities. For once, the abilities had been pointed in an accurate direction, and the result was extraordinary. It named names. It cited the board session minutes, which were public. It mentioned the Gringotts findings, which were a matter of financial record. It quoted Harry directly, the quotes that were hard to distort because they were plain, direct, and bereft of emotion. The owl traffic at Hogwarts on Monday morning exceeded anything the school had seen in living memory. Dumbledore received so many letters the pile on his desk was reportedly visible from the door. The Minister for Magic issued a statement. The Wisengamot requested a formal inquiry. 3 senior ministry officials Old McGonagall asking for clarification. Fawcett held an emergency press conference. And Lucius Malfoy, for reasons entirely his own, gave an interview to a competing publication that backed every factual claim in the Skeeter article with his personal attestation, which Harry thought was the most accidentally useful thing Lucius Malfoy had ever done. In the Great Hall that Monday morning, Harry ate breakfast in the eye of a storm that extended far beyond the walls of the castle and read the article straight through once, nodded at nothing in particular, and went back to his eggs. "You're not more, I don't know, pleased?" Ron said. "The article isn't the end," Harry said. "The article makes the next thing possible." He poured himself more juice. "The next thing is the Horcruxes." "In what order?" Neville asked. Harry thought about the list. About the 5 remaining anchors scattered through the world, keeping a fractured soul together, keeping a dark wizard tethered to existence. About the one in his own skull that he could feel now, every day, a faint specific pressure, not painful, just present, like a splinter he'd learned to account for. "The diadem first," he said. "It's here. We know where it is. Today after classes, we find the room of requirement and we see if the diadem is accessible." He looked around the table. "All of us. We're still first years," Ron said. "The diadem doesn't know that," Harry said. "Fair point, extremely valid." Ron looked at his plate. "Right. After classes." Hermione already had her notebook open. "We'll need a basilisk fang or something of equivalent destructive capability to destroy a Horcrux. The notes say only extremely powerful magic or powerful venom can damage them. We don't have either yet." She looked up. "But we can locate the diadem and assess the situation before we need the destruction method." "One step at a time," Harry said. Under his breath, so quiet that only Harry beside him heard it, Neville said, "One step at a time." The morning moved. Classes happened. History of Magic was about the Goblin Wars, Transfiguration was about turning beetles into buttons, Charms was an introduction to the Wingardium Leviosa which Harry performed correctly on the second attempt and Hermione on the first and Ron on the seventh with the correction swish and flick. It's a swish and flick delivered from Hermione in the tone of someone who has been watching the wrist movement go wrong for 20 minutes and can no longer contain themselves. Normal things. Ordinary school things. A day at Hogwarts. And under all of it, humming at the frequency that Harry had learned to hear, the low, patient vibration of something waiting. In the turban. In the scar. In the fragmented pieces of a soul scattered from a cave to a vault to a gaunt family ruin. Waiting, and counting down, and not yet knowing the count was running in the wrong direction. The room of requirement was on the 7th floor across from the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy attempting to teach trolls to dance. Harry had found this information in Dumbledore's file, a half-page of notes describing the room's mechanics, how to access it, what it could become. He read it 3 times on the walk up from dinner, the file tucked into his robes. "You have to walk past the wall 3 times, he said. "Thinking about what you need." "What do we need?" Ron said. "A place to hide something," Harry said. Dumbledore's notes had been specific. The diadem was in the hiding place version of the room, among centuries of accumulated objects left by students who needed to conceal things from teachers, lovers, rivals, or simply from the weight of owning them. He walked past the stretch of blank wall 3 times, thinking clearly and carefully about needing to find something hidden, and on the 3rd pass a door appeared, wooden, unassuming, nothing to distinguish it from any other door except that it hadn't been there 3 seconds ago. Harry opened it. The room beyond was the size of a cathedral and impossible by any law of physics that Harry knew anything about. It was full, stacked floor to ceiling with the accumulated debris of centuries of Hogwarts students, piled in towers and spreading in archipelagos across the stone floor. Broken furniture, stacked books, shrouded objects, rusted equipment, an enormous stuffed troll, 1,000 nameless things. The smell of it was the smell of old things and dust and the specific melancholy of objects that had been left behind. They stood in the doorway for a moment. "Right," Ron said. "Just 5 minutes of searching, then." "We're looking for something that feels wrong," Harry said. He was already feeling it, the familiar specific pressure of dark magic, not pain exactly, more like a note held too long. He moved left. This way. He trusted the feeling the same way he'd learned to trust it in himself. The scar's sensitivity, turned outward now, pointing like a compass to things that shared the same dark origin. He moved through the towers of forgotten things with the others fanned out behind him and felt the pull getting stronger, directional, until he stopped in front of a pile of broken furniture with a blood-stained cabinet propped against it and on the top of a wardrobe beside it, a tiara. Unremarkable in appearance. Old bronze, a design of small bronze talons. The diadem of Ravenclaw. Harry felt it from 3 feet away, the cold, patient, wrong feeling of something that held a piece of death inside it. It was the same feeling as his scar, in the way that all members of the same dark family were the same, a signature, a common origin. He knew it immediately. "That's it," Hermione said, beside him. She felt it too, he could tell from her face. "Don't touch it," Harry said. He looked at it carefully. The diadem sat on top of the wardrobe with the indifference of an object that had been waiting long enough not to be impatient about it. "We need the basilisk fawn." "There's a basilisk in the castle," Neville said, the same flat way Hermione had said it a week ago. "In the Chamber of Secrets," Harry said. "Dormant, probably." Dumbledore's notes said it hadn't been active recently. He looked at the diadem. "We need a fawn. 1 fawn is enough." He stood very still, thinking. "Or a blade infused with enough destructive power." The notes mention that it's the intent and force of destruction that matters as much as the method. "A powerful enough spell might work if, Fiendfire," Hermione said. They both looked at her. "It's in the textbook section of the restricted list," she said. "Cursed fire that destroys almost anything magical. It's extremely dangerous and difficult to control." A pause. "But it would work. 1 controlled burst, contained by the room itself, aimed at the diadem from a safe distance. "Can you cast it?" Harry asked. She looked at him with an expression that was simultaneously honest about the difficulty and completely certain. "Not yet. I'd need a week." "You have 2 weeks," Harry said. 3 if you need it. The diadem has been here for centuries. It'll wait." He stepped back from the diadem. "We leave it here. We don't touch it. In 2 weeks Hermione casts Fiendfire under controlled conditions with all of us present and we take 1 Horcrux off the list." "And then?" Neville said. "Then the ring." Harry looked at Snape's schedule in his head. Snape said he could neutralize the bone curse. "We need to plan an approach to Little Hangleton, that requires transport and an adult who isn't going to report to Dumbledore first." He thought. "Sirius, when he's well enough." "He was cleared 2 weeks ago," Ron said. "He's been at St. Mungo's 10 days. He looked stronger when I visited Thursday," Harry said. "Give him another week." "That's 3 Horcruxes in roughly a month," Hermione said. She was writing. "The locket and the cup are harder, they require direct access to Gringotts and a sea cave with blood magic and inferi, and I don't know how we, one at a time," Harry said. "We do the possible ones first. The harder ones become clearer once we understand the pattern better." He looked at the diadem one more time. The old bronze tiara, patient and wrong and full of someone else's soul. "We've been here 2 months, he said quietly. "We found Dumbledore's complete research, developed a theoretical mechanism for the Horcrux in my scar, identified all 6 remaining anchors, freed an innocent man from 11 years of wrongful imprisonment, triggered a formal ministry and board inquiry into Dumbledore's authority, and located the diadem." He looked at the others. "That's not bad for a first term." "Very low bar," Ron said. "For a first term," Hermione said, and the corner of her mouth moved. "For a first term," Neville said, and the smallest thing that was becoming a real smile moved across his face. Harry looked at them, these 3 people who had been strangers 8 weeks ago and were now the people he trusted absolutely, and felt something that was different from the grief he'd let out in the hospital room, something in the same register but opposite in direction. Something that moved outward rather than in. He recognized it, from what Snape had described, from what the books had said. The specific register of love that wasn't romantic and wasn't complicated, just the clear, clean acknowledgement that these people existed and he was glad they existed and he was with them and that mattered. He filed it. Not for the Reflexio, he had enough now. Just for itself. "Come on," he said. "It's nearly curfew." They walked out through the towers of forgotten things and the door closed behind them and the wall became a wall again, blank and unremarkable, and the diadem of Ravenclaw sat in the dark of the room of requirement and waited, as it had for centuries, unaware that its waiting was nearly done. That night, at 11, under his invisibility cloak, which had been in the Potter vault and which Dumbledore had sent with the file as a separate package without note, which was the closest Dumbledore had yet come to an apology, Harry sat on the windowsill of the astronomy tower and looked out at the grounds. The lake was silver in the moonlight. The forest was dark at its edges. The castle breathed around him, warm and enormous, full of sleeping people and waking portraits and moving staircases and several hundred years of accumulated history. He pressed his fingertips to his scar. The feeling there was familiar now, the patient, cold pressure of something that wasn't him. He'd stopped trying to ignore it. He held it in his awareness instead, clear-eyed, the way he held most things, seeing it exactly as it was rather than as he wished it was or feared it was. Through the link, dim and distant, something else was also awake. He felt it orient toward him, the familiar quality of that attention, sharp and old and recently recalibrated. The curiosity had not gone away. If anything, it had grown more complex. There was something in it now that he'd been feeling for 2 weeks and hadn't named, something that ran underneath the calculation and the ancient malevolence, something that was almost, if Harry let himself be fully honest about it, interest. The Dark Lord was interested in him. Not as a target. Or not only as a target. As a phenomenon. Something that didn't fit the expected pattern. Something that kept surprising him. Harry understood this. He'd been surprising people all term. He was getting used to it. He sent something back through the link. Deliberate again, the way he'd done at dinner weeks ago. Not words, not a message. Just presence. Just the steady, clear feeling of someone who knew what was coming and had prepared for it and was not in any hurry and was not afraid. The attention through the link sharpened. Harry looked out at the silver lake and the dark forest and thought about the Horcruxes, 5 remaining, 1 ticking down. About Sirius, recovering. About Snape in his dungeon writing methodology notes. About Hermione preparing to learn Fiendfire. About Neville, who had stood up in a hearing room and said "I'm not finished" and meant it. About Ron, who had sat with him this morning and handed him tea and said nothing and been entirely, completely present. He thought about what Dumbledore had spent 50 years building and what had taken 6 weeks to begin dismantling. He thought about what his mother had given him, not just the protection, but the template. The information that love, held correctly and used with clear eyes, was the most durable magic in existence. He looked up at the stars, real stars tonight. The sealing of the Great Hall's enchantment was finally good for something, and thought about what came next. Not the diadem or the ring or the scar or the hearing or the article or any single thing. The whole of it. The shape of a game that was still in progress, that no one had won yet, that the board had been redesigned for in the middle of play. He thought about a chess piece that had looked at the board and decided it was a player. "Your move," he said quietly, to the dark. The scar gave a single, faint pulse. Through the link, the ancient attention considered this. Then, faintly, dimly, distantly, in the register of something old enough to have respect for worthy opponents, even ones it intended to destroy, something acknowledged him. Harry nodded once, to the night, to no one, to himself. Then he climbed down from the windowsill, folded himself back under the invisibility cloak, and went to bed.